and conspiracy theories are given an economic advantage on Facebook. And the result is that ideas from the fringe, things like antivirus and white supremacy, have been mainstreamed. And that's undermined democracy, it's undermined public health, it's undermined privacy, and this is a huge problem. And if you're an investor, Facebook's been a great stock for you, but on a looking forward basis, you have to ask the question, if the US loses its ability to be a democracy, and if each one of us loses the ability to make our own choices because they're being made by internet platforms, is that a good trade, right? I think that's the real question that comes up here.
And if you're an investor in Facebook today, it was a great day for Facebook. Facebook up at the close, Facebook up 3.5% after the close on the back of these results that are mixed. And on the same day that these, thousands of pages of documents have been poured through by multiple different news organizations. If that's not going to send Facebook stock down, what is?
Well, to be clear, I don't think the stock's a good measure of what's going on here. I think the stock market operates on a completely different timescale. And so I think investors are making the correct judgment, which is the numbers were terrific, at least relative to what you would have expected. Looking at Snap the other day, the impact of Apple changing privacy had a dramatic effect on Snap. At Facebook, they have a lot of dials to turn. They can lower the quality of the ads that they show. They can allow people new users onto the site that, if you will, are not authentic. There are lots of dials that are available to them to make the numbers look good. But that's very short term, and I think investors have a super short time horizon here. Whereas the stuff going on with government is going to take time to process. You have legal issues relative to the SEC with disclosure, relative to insider trading. There's a big case in Delaware, 6 large pension plans that are accusing Facebook of insider trading around Cambridge Analytica. These things are felonies. There are Department of Justice cases relative to price fixing in digital advertising, related to there should be an investigation of the whistleblowers' information about human trafficking or about the January 6th insurrection, where, again, Facebook has been implicated time and again in both the radicalization of people into QAnon and into Stop the Steal, and then allowing them to organize the protests and then the insurrection itself on Facebook. And it's obvious management knew about all of this stuff, and they always prioritize profit.
Does time spent on Facebook among teens dropping 16%, does that alarm you? Is that something that Facebook should have been more transparent about? Is that something that investors had known coming directly from the company itself? Would the stock be continuing to rise? Would revenue be continuing to grow $30 billion quarter after quarter?
So I think the issues that Facebook really faces is that in North America and Western Europe, its most profitable markets, it has reached saturation of the population. And there's no question that TikTok is draining people away from Instagram. And I look at this, and the bad press that Instagram's getting right now should accelerate that departure. And I don't think there's anything Facebook can do about it that's legitimate. They'd love to change the conversation to the metaverse, but that technology is not good enough to replace the hole that is being left in their business. Facebook is a mature company. It's not going to grow as rapidly. And if the numbers are higher in the short run, that's coming out of the future. And investors just need to be more careful. They should really pay attention.
How big an opportunity do you think the metaverse actually is for Facebook, Roger? I mean, Mark Zuckerberg wants to bet the future on this, a potential name change on this. I mean, is that going to pick up the slack?
The name change has nothing to do with this. The name change is about distracting us from the fact that the company is going to face a series of legal problems, and Zuck personally is going to face some legal problems here. And, this is a real test for our system, right? We've allowed this company and Google and others to run without any supervision. They've caused tremendous harm. They've made investors a fortune. And investors are incredibly thankful, but the rest of the country is pretty unhappy about it. And the question is, are we going to do something to try to restore some balance, or are we not going to do so? And the metaverse is literally a dream. And if you look at the demos, they're horrible. And to my mind, Facebook is going to spend so much time dealing with the problems that are being exposed now, both in court and in Congress, that The metaverse, but if they ever get it to work, it's going to come very late. And you're not going to want to wait from here to there on the hope of the metaverse. The name change is literally a distraction. It's literally something that they're just trying to do two things, to get us to look elsewhere, and they want to somehow find a way to insulate Mark Zuckerberg from legal liability for the problems that have already been created. And
at this point,
Sorry.
Roger, what kind of regulation do you think is realistic and right? Reid Hoffman, an investor in Facebook in the early days, just like yourself, told me that he's disappointed in Facebook as well, but he thinks that breaking up Facebook is the wrong approach because that'll make it even harder to centralize all of these systems and the AI technology that's needed to combat hate on a global scale. What do you think?
I think we have three areas we need to regulate, and they need to cover not just Facebook, but all of technology. We need to have safety regulations, something that functions like the FDA, that sits there and says, wait a minute, facial recognition, deep fakes have no valid commercial use. They shouldn't be allowed in the market until they prove a valid use. The same way would be true of the pharmaceutical. And companies like Google and YouTube and Instagram and Facebook would have to make changes in their business practices to make them safe for people. And that would be something that this FDA-like thing would look at every year. The second area is privacy. This whole notion that companies are allowed to use data to manipulate the choices and behavior of people, that is really not an American idea. I mean, it's basically taking away our right of self-determination. So it's like child labor. It's the sort of thing that we should ban outright. And then thirdly, on antitrust, I think the real thing is to allow for competition. To me, if you're going to break them up, that comes downstream. But first, you have to open up markets and prevent companies from monopolizing the way everything takes place in the economy. You saw what happened when Facebook went down. The millions of small businesses dependent on Facebook were shut down by that. And that's what monopolies do, and that's not good.
Roger, Elevation Partners, Roger McNamee, always appreciate you joining us to talk about this. We could talk about it for hours. I'm going to have to let you go, but appreciate you taking the time to stop by and continuing to help us break down these very complex issues. Coming up, no interest in Pinterest. PayPal says it's not pursuing an acquisition of the social platform. We are going to bring you the latest next. This is Bloomberg.
When was the moment you discovered that you were meant for the business world?
Have you been getting a lot of inquiries from employers?
And then you started looking for the best sources of information.
Technology is challenging the regulators.
Doctors use kind of a virtual reality look.
I feel like the world is courting Elon Musk.
Which is how you got here.
How are other bankers restricted now?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Take a not-so-random walk through hot topics in markets and finance. Listen to Odd Lots, a weekly Bloomberg podcast hosted by Joe Weisenthal and Tracy Alloway. Odd Lots explores everything from how the Seinfeld TV show can teach you about economics to why the Federal Reserve blundered by letting Lehman Brothers fail. The Odd Lots podcast, available every Monday on the Bloomberg Terminal, Bloomberg.com, iTunes, SoundCloud, and whatever app you use to browse podcasts.
Are you interested in a challenging and exciting career? One where you can be part of solving complex challenges across industries and geographies. Bloomberg's ever-expanding technology, data, news, and media services foster innovation, empower clients, and offer nearly limitless opportunities for career growth. Visit Bloomberg.com/careers today to view our current job opportunities. Bloomberg LP is an equal opportunity employer. The address once again is Bloomberg.com/careers. You know the difference between your bank and the banking business.
The new chief executive will take the bank in a different direction.
Your clothes and the fashion industry.
This is the new look of retail.
Your house and the real estate market.
Is that something you see reflected in the real estate business?
So do we. Bloomberg, for your professional side.
Is the U.S. really that immune to some of those influences?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business, Radio.com, and iHeartRadio apps, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
A few other tech stories we are watching. PayPal says it's not pursuing an acquisition of Pinterest, ending days of speculation over a potential $45 billion deal. Last week, Bloomberg News reported PayPal had approached Pinterest about a potential buyout. An acquisition of Pinterest, the visual search and scrapbooking platform, would have boosted PayPal's ambitions to become the next global super app. And the movie based on the 1965 sci-fi book Dune took the #1 spot at the North American box office at the weekend. The Warner Brothers film reaping $40.1 million in ticket sales, which was $10 million more than the studio had projected. Second spot went to the latest installment of the Halloween horror franchise, titled Halloween Kills. Coming up, the Facebook files suggest the social network may only catch 5% of hateful content, if that. We're speaking with longtime former Google exec and Chamber of Progress founder Adam Kovacevic about whether it's time for big government to step up if big tech can't. This is Bloomberg.
There's a pattern of behavior at Facebook, which is they're very good at dancing with data.
When will you be able to go to a meeting where nobody smells like hand sanitizer? Who knows? But we can give you the latest business and financial news, fragrance-free.
Let's tease out some of what you just said.
Are there tools in the toolbox for the Fed?
Does that point to the need for continued monetary support?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
You do realize the mark that this is having on a younger generation.
Bloomberg, the world is listening. Start your market day with Bloomberg Surveillance.
The bond market, it's a really interesting soup.
Tom Keene, Jonathan Ferro, and Lisa Abramowitz.
Isn't your base case the worst case scenario for most?
Who says finance can't be fun?
Who's in the zoo, guys? Which one of us?
I think it's pretty clear who's in the zoo.
Bloomberg Surveillance. Must listen, must watch.
I think they made a great decision separating us both.
Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television.
If knowledge is power, the Bloomberg Terminal is your power up, connecting you to the real-time financial news, data, and analytics that can take your workflow to the next level. Power up at Bloomberg.com/professional.
Where are today's real testing grounds for the latest innovation? Places where advancements in health, transportation, and business happen every day. Cities. Today, cities lead the way, taking local solves and turning them into global solutions. Now, introducing Bloomberg City Lab, a new platform covering the present and future of global cities. Learn more at Bloomberg.com/CityLab. Brought to you in partnership with Hyundai.
Yeah, what you doing with your phone? Taking pictures?
No, I'm asking it questions.
Like what?
Hey, Bobo, do flowers have best friends?
I'm sorry. I'm afraid I don't know that.
Hey, follow me. I want to show you something. Look, flowers do have best friends.
Whoa.
Some answers can only be found in nature. Discover the unsearchable. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a trail near you. Brought to you by the United States Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Before and after the pandemic.
Is it driven by politics or by science?
That may be how we keep track of our lives from here on out.
What do you think the political effects of that impatience will be?
And through it all, there's been Bloomberg.
We begin on Capitol Hill.
The most accurate business, world, and healthcare news before and after.
The fundamentals do not justify this price action.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Hi, it's Olivia Munn with my shelter pets, Frankie and Chance. Say hi, guys. When I adopted them, I discovered that they both have incredible personalities. Chance's sole purpose in life is to love and to be loved. Frankie is a little bit of a scoundrel and always entertaining. They're a little bit of a lot of things, but they're all pure love. Adopt pure love at theshelterpetproject.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council, the Humane Society of the United States, and Maddie's Fund.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Facebook shares up in after-hours trading as the company reported strong third-quarter revenue growth, but gave a tepid forecast for sales in the current period. This as pressure continues to mount on the social platform over its handling of information and user trends. Frances Haugen, the whistleblower bringing to light revelations about Facebook's inner workings, has gone on to say the company doesn't do enough to combat hate speech, with the platform only managing to take down 3 to 5% of hateful content across the site.
Mark Zuckerberg put out a white paper in 2018 saying engagement-based ranking is dangerous unless the AI can take out the bad things. And as you saw, they're getting 3 to 5% of things like hate speech.
Haugen continues her testimony focusing on how Facebook is contributing to amplify hate across the platform.
And the question is, what is Facebook doing to amplify or expand hate? What is it doing to amplify or expand ethnic violence?
You're right. I mean, Facebook didn't invent hate, but do you think it's making hate worse?
Unquestionably, it's making hate worse.
I want to bring in now Adam Kovacevic, Chamber of Progress founder, and Naomi Nix, our Bloomberg News technology reporter who covers Facebook and who has poured through these documents herself, focusing specifically on the hate speech and revelations there. The documents, Naomi, suggest that Facebook only takes down less than 5% of hate speech. At the same time that we've heard Facebook representatives say they have a zero tolerance for this stuff. And also that the algorithm makes it even more difficult to take this stuff down. Walk us through how that's even possible.
Yeah, so for quite some time, Facebook has been really touting the power of its AI systems to detect hate speech and automatically take down some of it. You'll regularly see Facebook put out statistics that say, more than 90% of the hate speech that we take action on was caught by our internal systems before a user reported it to the company. What they have never really detailed is what is the total universe of hate speech on the platform that it is or isn't taking action on. And what some of the documents suggest is that Facebook is only taking action on less than 5%. And so what we're seeing is just a story of different statistics, and the ones revealed by the documents are certainly far more dire.
We've been listening into Facebook's earnings call. Mark Zuckerberg just said that he believes these documents, the revelations of Frances Haugen, paint a false picture of the company. Take a listen to what he had to say.
My view is that what we are seeing is a coordinated effort to selectively use leaked documents to paint a false picture of our company.
Adam, what's your reaction to that, given that these are Facebook's own internal documents, not one in isolation, but thousands and thousands of pages?
Yeah, look, I worked in companies, and I don't know that any company I worked in would necessarily love the idea of their internal documents being published. On the other hand, I do think that, looking in the mirror, as these documents do, it's painful, but it can be a useful exercise. And I think it can make the company better. Look, I mean, Facebook is a big, global, important service. It plays a really important role in the lives of its users. The questions about how it handles content and other issues are a matter of public importance. But I do think we should treat the revelations from the Facebook papers and reporting with nuance, because, I think one of the things that comes through the documents is you see a company trying to balance competing values, right? And they may not always get it right, but I do think there's value, hopefully, in seeing kind of how others view them. And I think that will ultimately make the company better.
Well, and I guess we all wonder if indeed that is the effect that this will have. Frances Haugen, Naomi, also made the case that Facebook prioritizes hate speech in English, and specifically American English, more so than in developing countries, and especially countries where they don't speak English. Talk to us about how Facebook's efforts to handle hate speech, misinformation in Western English-speaking countries compares to the rest of the world.
Well, look, it takes resources and time to not only hire individual staffers for content moderation purposes in these various countries that Facebook is operating. It takes resources to train its classifiers to decide what is hate speech and how, at what point should it be flagged to Facebook's internal systems. And, what the documents suggest is Facebook has prioritized countries in the Western world, and in particular, English. There's one document that looks at the time spent, of the total time spent training hate speech classifiers on the platform, nearly a quarter of it is spent in English. And so, that leaves that potentially developing regions and regions that are more vulnerable to offline harms because of online activity, left behind some of the more advanced nations.
Now, of course, hate speech, Adam, is not just limited to Facebook. But is this because the line between hate speech and censorship, or hate speech and free speech, is too hard to draw? Or is this because Facebook in particular is just not doing enough?
I think you might see some conservatives making that argument. I know you had David Sachs on last week, and I think he made that argument. Despite the fact that I think we tend to view online speech through a partisan prism, Morning Consult had a really interesting survey out 2 weeks ago where they showed that 70% of voters, which is a very high number, want social media services to have stricter content controls, which I found just really interesting. And I think you probably see the same thing outside the U.S. Your question to Naomi about international. So should Facebook do more? Absolutely. Should all the services do more to reduce the amount of hate and hoaxes and disinformation on their services? Absolutely, because I think that's clearly what their customers want. It's what their advertisers want. And I want to preserve the legal tools, the First Amendment and Section 230, that help them do that. And I think ultimately what consumers are saying here is like, we want to have a good experience on your social network. We don't want to be bombarded with junk. And so, everybody, all the social services can be doing a lot more to make that the case.
Now, the question remains, what will government do about this? Will the SEC step in? Will lawmakers step in? Will there actually be regulation? I want to take a listen to another thing that Frances Haugen had to say about regulation in particular before UK Parliament.
And right now, Facebook doesn't have to solve these problems. It doesn't have to disclose they exist, and it doesn't have to come up with solutions. But in a world where they were regulated and mandated, you have to tell us what the 5-point plan is on each of these things. And if it's not good enough, we're going to come back to you and ask you again. That's a world where Facebook now has an incentive to, instead of giving 10,000, like investing 10,000 engineers to make the metaverse, we have 10,000 engineers to make us safer. And that's the world we need.
Adam, as someone who has worked on the company side for so many years, do you believe regulation is needed, and what kind of regulation is needed, especially given the new issues that have come to light through Facebook's own eyes, from its own internal research?
Regulation is needed. There are some good ideas out there. We should have a federal comprehensive privacy law, which has been stalled for years. There's a really good piece of legislation by Congressman Raskin from Maryland that would have an NIH study of kids' technology issues. But I also think we need to be careful around particularly issues around speech. A lot of the criticism that comes Facebook's way right now is really a question of its content moderation decisions, which are, they're making certain decisions about certain types of speech. Most of that is First Amendment protected speech, which the company has still made a choice to disallow. So the fact is legislation probably can't touch a lot of that. But I also think that we need to make sure that legislation and regulation isn't driven by a desire to get one company or another, because usually when that happens, you end up with collateral impacts, say on smaller services, smaller social networks, and that wouldn't be good for competition, which I think a lot of us want to stimulate as well.
Indeed. Now, Adam, we've been continuing to listen in to the Facebook's earnings call. I want you to take a listen to something Mark Zuckerberg just had to say about young users in particular. Take a listen.
Over the last decade, as the audience that uses our apps has expanded so much and we focused on serving everyone, our services have gotten dialed to be the best for the most people who use them rather than specifically for young adults. And during this period, competition has also gotten a lot more intense, especially with Apple's iMessage growing in popularity, and more recently, the rise of TikTok, which is one of the most effective competitors that we have ever faced. So we are retooling our teams to make serving young adults their North Star.
So, Adam, Facebook has made the argument that kids are using technology, whether we like it or not. Somebody has to build that experience for them and make it safe. There's, of course, a question of whether we want Facebook to do that for our children. There is a hearing on Capitol Hill tomorrow focused on kids and technology. TikTok, YouTube, Snap will be there. Facebook will not be there. But what is your view on who should be making this technology? Should it be these big tech companies? Should it be completely different? Should it be a nonprofit effort? Should the business model, driving kids' technology be completely different and not something that's necessarily based on engagement or advertising?
Look, I have young kids. I like that we have, I have Disney Plus as an option. I've got Amazon Prime, I've got Netflix as an option, and also PBS, the publicly supported option. So I think all of that's great. And frankly, to the extent that there's, an appetite for stimulating more competition in kids' technology, I think that's a wonderful thing. Frankly, our laws, particularly the kids' privacy law, has for a long time disincentivized services from building for kids because services were worried about running afoul of the law. I think one of the things you've seen in the last couple of years is services like Facebook Messenger Kids, YouTube Kids, Apple's Family Sharing. They're all really good services because they give parents a lot of control. One of the things I just think we need to be more honest about the fact, though, is like when kids hit that tween age, they start kind of chafing at the limits of kid design technology. And so I think we just need to study this. That's why my organization is a big supporter of this bill by Congressman Raskin that would bring government resources to bear to study this, study how kids are using it. I think parents, this is a tough issue for parents. They're really struggling with this. And frankly, I don't know that anybody in government is really giving them a very satisfying answer right now.
All right, well, we're going to be following that hearing coming up on Tuesday. Adam Kovacevic, Chamber of Progress founder, and Naomi Nix, who covers Facebook for Bloomberg. Thank you both so much for joining us. Coming up, shaking things up in the rental car industry. Hertz places a massive order for 100,000 Teslas. We're going to have much more next. This is Bloomberg.
Economics.
All this doom and gloom is out there.
Finance.
Do you see this as a technical correction?
Investment.
What are you looking at to give you some sort of compass through this period?
The Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast.
Lots and lots of talk about what the Fed should and shouldn't do.
Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrow, Lisa Abramowitz, and the names that shape the world's markets.
We speak with Professor Schiller of Yale University.
Bloomberg Surveillance. Listen today at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts. The best of Bloomberg Business Week every business day.
Sales activity soaring.
The Bloomberg Business Week podcast with Carol Messer and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovich.
What does an Apple-developed car look like?
The day's breaking global business, finance, and tech news, along with smart analysis.
This stock has been on a tear.
The Bloomberg Business Week podcast.
Can we just get like 20 seconds from you on Bitcoin?
Listen today on BloombergRadio.com, the Bloomberg Business app, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts. The market's in focus every business day. The Bloomberg Markets Podcast with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller.
Are there some sectors that you want to have more or less exposure to? We've got to vaccinate the whole world.
Analysis of the day's Wall Street action.
What's the thought on Apple here?
From Bloomberg Intelligence, Bloomberg Opinion, and influential newsmakers.
The bond market was the boss.
Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller. Subscribe today at BloombergRadio.com, the Bloomberg Business app, or iTunes. Before and after the pandemic.
Is it driven by politics or by science?
That may be how we keep track of our lives from here on out.
What do you think the political effects of that impatience will be?
And through it all, there's been Bloomberg.
We begin on Capitol Hill.
The most accurate business, world, and healthcare news before and after.
The fundamentals do not justify this price action.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Welcome back. Let's get a further look at the markets with Kriti Gupta in New York. Kriti, what are you watching now?
Well, Emily, we are smack in the middle of earnings season, and one of the big themes right now is inflation. What's better way to measure inflation than yields? And one of the big issues for tech here is that as we started to see yields rise earlier in the year, it kind of spooked tech, especially big tech, but not anymore, Emily. In the last couple of months, you can really see yields and tech rising together, and it really has everything to do with tech being an inflation hedge. Essentially, they're so big, they're actually able to pass on the costs to consumers a little better. That's the macro environment I want to really think about as we go into the rest of earnings season. Let's switch to the micro really quickly and talk about some of the movers on the day, specifically Tesla and Hertz. Tesla coming up with a double kind of booster for its stock. The first, a $1,200 price target from Morgan Stanley's Adam Jonas. And then on top of that, a Bloomberg scoop from our very own Eric Schatzker, a 100,000 car order from Hertz, a big investment in their own EV fleet. So really boosting both companies you can see on the day. And of course, you saw that helped Tesla hit the $1 trillion market cap, beating even Facebook, Emily.
Right. All right. Kriti, thank you so much. Dive into this a little bit more. Big move for Hertz, which is barely 4 months out of bankruptcy, now placing that order for 100,000 Teslas. It is the first step of an ambitious plan to electrify its rental car fleet. Joining us now with more on the scoop, our Bloomberg News Tesla reporter, Dana Hall. So, huge order for Tesla. What makes this so significant?
This is just going to be enormous because not only is Hertz ordering these cars, but they've got this whole ad campaign with Tom Brady. So, you know, Tesla has never paid for advertising, traditional advertising at least. And now you have like this NFL star basically encouraging people to let's go electric. And so there's like this de facto pitchman now for the whole EV revolution and Tom Brady, but Hertz is paying for it.
So how will this actually work? If you rent a Tesla from Hertz, will you be able to use Tesla's Supercharger stations?
You will, absolutely. And I think what's really important is that, you know, right now, if you don't own a Tesla but you want to drive one, you can try to get a ride or borrow a friend's, or you can rent on Turo. But there was never a way to like fly to another city and rent a Tesla at an airport. And now you will be able to, not just in North America, but Europe as well.
Is this something we're expecting other rental car companies to do?
I think so. I mean, I think the question is like, where are they going to get the cars from? Because other automakers are still selling EVs in fairly low numbers. But I think you're absolutely going to see this big pivot, particularly for business travelers who, you know, maybe their corporations will give them a discount or an incentive to go electric on the next time they travel for business.
Here we are now at a $1 trillion market cap. I mean, what does Tesla have going for the rest of the year? Where does that number go?
Up, probably. I mean, you know, Tesla still has risks, right? Like the NHTSA is investigating autopilot. The NTSB is not happy that the company hasn't followed safety recommendations. But this is a company that's now going into several different markets: fleet sales, insurance, energy, moving the headquarters to Texas, opening these 2 new factories in Berlin and Austin.
We're looking at the chart there of Facebook and Tesla, you know, both at that $1 trillion mark, and it's just sort of a tale of 2 companies. And I wonder if sort of the next generation of what is big tech is different, you know, this decade.
Right, they just keep expanding. I mean, like octopuses with tentacles and all kinds of businesses.
What about what's going on in China? Obviously, there have been some headwinds there. There continue to be supply chain issues, which is affecting everyone and really car makers.
Right, Tesla navigated the chip shortage better than most. They had record third quarter sales, which really underpinned the strong earnings report. Adam Jonas raised his price target today. So, I mean, the chip shortage is still an issue, but I think Tesla is feeling pretty strong positioned.
And yet there are the things that Tesla hasn't delivered on that Elon Musk has promised, like the ride-sharing network. When is that going to happen? Or is that now, is that still part of the plan?
It's still part of the plan. I mean, 2020 was supposed to be the year of the robo-taxi. We are nowhere near close to that actually happening. But as Elon says himself, you know, he delivers often on later timelines, but eventually he thinks he'll get there.
All right. Bloomberg's Dana Hall, thank you for your reporting on this.
Thank you.
Now, sticking with Tesla, the Model 3 was the top-selling car in Europe last month. It is the first time an electric car has outsold rival models with gas engines. It is a major milestone for EVs and another sign that the car industry is accelerating its pivot away from the combustion engine. Coming up, more on Facebook's third quarter results, just how big it is betting on the metaverse. We'll have the latest next. And as we head to break, Blue Origin and Sierra Space have announced plans to build a commercial space station in low Earth orbit called Orbital Reef. The project is designed to operate as a mixed-use business park in space and has the backing of Boeing, Redwire Space, and Arizona State University, among others. The station is expected to start operating in the second half of this decade. This is Bloomberg.
Would you say it's more important to gather information fast, or to have it first, or to be the most accurate?
They can really move the needle when it comes to programs.
The point in all this surely is the level of support you'll get from companies for this.
What if you don't have to choose?
It also has enormous importance for the labor market.
How do they get ahead of different administrations? We see this move towards digital currencies.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. We used to take our freedom of movement for granted. Not anymore.
It's not just the people who work for the airlines.
And it's natural to feel grateful for the things that kept you going.
Does America have a chance to lose our advantage?
Can we get to herd immunity fast enough so that we'll be in good shape?
But really, we were just doing our jobs.
Oxford University is starting a study on patients who've recovered from COVID.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. What's the difference between you and your competition?
What's your vision in this relationship?
We're guessing one thing is that you are better informed.
European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde had this to say.
Actually, we're not guessing.
The realism of this is tangible.
Up to the moment news.
Some of the biggest states could see most of the money.
Expert analysis.
Does that mean you're focusing on banks and other financials?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. If you're the kind of person who gets nervous when there's no news,
what's the administration's message to progressive members of the House?
Then consider this your relaxation zone.
We're all looking to travel reopening.
The latest business and financial news.
Doesn't that necessarily help your investments?
Why did it have the opposite effect?
For those who really, really need it.
That's how we knew that things were coming undone.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
The focus has been on Facebook, with more internal documents brought to light by many news organizations, including Bloomberg. All this as the social network reported its third quarter results, the earnings call underway. I want to recap the numbers here with our Bloomberg Intelligence senior analyst, Mandeep Singh. So, Mandeep, shares actually up off the back of this report. Some investors thought it would be a lot more bloody, especially given that Facebook warned multiple times over the course of the year that Apple's ad tracking technology was having a negative impact. Revenue missing, profit beating, and user growth better than expected. What are your main takeaways?
Yeah, so clearly, I think a lot of bad news was priced in. And look, they came up with a pretty broad guidance for the 4Q, so still talking about uncertainty. But the fact is, with the IDFA changes, larger companies like Facebook, like Alphabet, they can somewhat navigate it in a much better way than the smaller ones like Snap, Pinterest, and Twitter. And the reason I say that is because, Facebook has a family of apps. It can track user activity across those apps, and the ad effectiveness remains. I think what investors are more worried about is the top-line diversification, because the law of large numbers is catching up to Facebook. And, they will run against difficult comps next year, so they keep talking about metaverse. But the question is, can they really ramp it up to a level where it starts, contributing to the ad revenue?
Right. And Roger McNamee, early Facebook investor, has said, no, Facebook won't be able to ramp up revenues from the metaverse to take over. We just heard from Mark Zuckerberg on the call, giving a little more context on the Apple changes. Take a listen to what he had to say.
As expected, we did experience revenue headwinds this quarter, including from Apple's changes that are not only negatively affecting our business, but millions of small businesses and what is already a difficult time for them in the economy.
Do you think we're going to continue to see the impact of these Apple ad tracking changes, or was this quarter the worst of it?
No, I think you're going to keep hearing about it. And the way these companies are trying to offset it is they're trying to maximize the user time spent on the app. So basically, the goal is to keep the users on the platform for a longer time by layering in e-commerce, payments, and that's how you offset, the inability to track a user outside your app. And every company is doing it. Facebook is also trying to do it. So basically, every company in this ad universe is becoming a super app now. They'll keep adding more functionality inside the app.
Sheryl Sandberg also speaking on the conference call, talking about commerce, saying that it's no longer growing at the pace it was during the pandemic and the impacts of that. Take a listen to what she had to say.
E-commerce is no longer growing at the pace it was at the height of the pandemic. These factors have been compounded for many advertisers by major global supply chain issues and labor shortages, which have left many consumer businesses with less inventory. This has reduced their appetite to generate demand from consumers, which has impacted advertising spend.
Mandeep, what do you make of that?
Well, so clearly, we pulled forward some demand for e-commerce last year. I mean, some CEOs talk about pulling forward, 2 years worth of digital transformation or 5 years worth of e-commerce and digital transformation in 1 year. Well, they are going to run against difficult comps next year, and they're setting up expectations. But at the end of the day, all these companies are trying to add more functionality around e-commerce within their apps. So even though I think the comps get tougher, they will keep layering more functionality, like I said, payments and e-commerce within the apps.
All right, our Bloomberg Intelligence senior analyst, Mandeep Singh, thank you for helping us dig through that. We're going to continue to pour through the results and bring you more highlights as we have them. Meantime, plenty more tech results this week. Tuesday, we get quarterly reports from Alphabet, Microsoft, Twitter, Texas Instruments, and AMD. eBay Wednesday, Apple, and Amazon on Thursday. And of course, all the details right here on Bloomberg Technology. That does it for this edition of the show. Make sure you tune in tomorrow. We're going to be joined by Blockchain Capital General Partner Spencer Bogart and Techonomy Founder and Editor-in-Chief David Kirkpatrick. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg.
When was the moment you discovered that you were meant for the business world?
Have you been getting a lot of inquiries from employers?
And then you started looking for the best sources of information.
Technology is challenging the regulators.
Doctors use kind of a virtual reality look.
I feel like the world is courting Elon Musk.
Which is how you got here.
How are other bankers restricted now?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Take a not-so-random walk through hot topics in markets and finance. Listen to Odd Lots, a weekly Bloomberg podcast hosted by Joe Weisenthal and Tracy Alloway. Odd Lots explores everything from how the Seinfeld TV show can teach you about economics to why the Federal Reserve blundered by letting Lehman Brothers fail. The Odd Lots podcast, available every Monday on the Bloomberg Terminal, Bloomberg.com, iTunes, SoundCloud, and whatever app you use to browse podcasts.
If knowledge is power, the Bloomberg Terminal is your power up, connecting you to real-time financial data, market-moving news, powerful analytics, and an influential network of financial decision makers around the world. Share ideas, negotiate trades, and gain the insight you need to make more informed decisions. See how the Terminal can take your workflow to the next level at Bloomberg.com/professional.
Story of a very special woman. Just a few knew about her superpowers. In a matter of seconds, she turned herself into a great mathematician. She masqueraded as a regular person at work, but as a superhero at home. Everyone knows her as Gabriella. I still call her Mom.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need to help, complete with tips and resources at aarp.org/caregiving. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Markets, you can't predict them.
The Delta variant is ripping up the playbook.
Investors being in a bit of a fog at the moment.
But when you listen to us, you'll come pretty close.
Let's take a look at those small cap stocks.
We're taking a look at some of the sector winners, the sector losers.
Is this bullish or is it bearish?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Broadcasting 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Middle East, our top stories this morning.
Asia Pacific stocks rise after a record close on the S&P 500. Corporate earnings and progress on President Biden's economic agenda lift sentiment, even as the debate over inflation risks intensifies. Tesla hits a $1 trillion valuation mark as Hertz orders 100,000 vehicles. Meanwhile, Facebook shares gain in late trading on strong user growth and the promise of a $50 billion stock buyback. A U-turn in Turkey. President Erdogan drops his demand for 10 Western ambassadors to be expelled. And UBS earnings are due this hour. Can the Swiss lender match the strong numbers we've seen from US banks so far this season? We find out in 45 minutes and hear from the CEO today. It has just gone 8 a.m. across the Emirates, midday here in Singapore. I'm Juliet Saleh filling in for Yusuf and Manas, who are on location, and we will be live to the Future Investment Initiative event in Riyadh later this hour. Let's check in on your markets, though, as we saw the S&P 500 have a record high on Wall Street, and we are seeing very much a risk-on tone across the region. You can see S&P 500 futures also moving higher, and particular interest in tech stocks. The Nasdaq futures there outperforming a gain of about 0.5% as we saw a lot of focus on those positive tech earnings. You've got WTI oil, just sliding below $84 a barrel. Investors, of course, weighing at these US stockpile concerns versus the prospects for talks about Iran. And then you've got your US 10-year just below 1.64% there. Let's have a look, though, at Facebook. A big thumbs up here for this stock as it came through with that announcement that it will buy back as much as $50 billion more in stock. Shares rising in after-hours trade here. We saw the latest result showing about 3.6 billion people actively using its network of social media apps. And this was more than analysts predicted. But let's jump into my terminal and have a look at how you are starting to see some of the quarterly user growth stall. Some of the findings outlined by the whistleblower Frances Haugen, showing that senior employers are allegedly alarmed over the company's inability to keep teens engaged. And we have seen quarterly daily active user growth slow. Shares certainly off the highs too of $382, which was reached in September. Let's get a check now on how markets are faring in Asia with Annabelle Drewlers, who's in our Hong Kong studio. Annabelle, pretty risk on out there.
Yeah, that's right, Jules. Well, you mentioned Facebook, and these US earnings really boosting sentiment here in Asia as well today. So we're seeing most benchmarks in the region higher, led, of course, higher by the Nikkei over in Japan. But the Kospi also 0.6% to the upside, even though we had that cooler third quarter GDP reading. China, though, a little bit weaker here today, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Primarily, it is concerned still around the property sector, and we did have that developer Modern Land earlier saying that it has missed a dollar payment due on Monday. Now, if you pull up the terminal now, you can see the reasons that the Nikkei is jumping so much today. We're seeing a broad-based rally. All sectors are higher, led by the transport and steel indexes. There are also other suppliers, including to Tesla, the likes of Panasonic, jumping today with that massive 100,000 order vehicles from Hertz.
All right, Annabelle. Well, Tesla has joined the exclusive $1 trillion club after a landmark order for 100,000 new cars from Hertz. It is a key milestone for Elon Musk, who's seen his company's shares surge amid a global shift to electric vehicles. Let's bring in our transport editor, Peter Verco, now. And Peter, this is a big win for Tesla.
Yeah, it certainly is. As you said, 100,000 car order. That's about $4.2 billion in revenue, according to people familiar with the situation that Bloomberg spoke to, which also suggests that Hertz isn't getting a discount on this order. Elon Musk also tweeted earlier that they are paying full price. It's also a real vote of confidence in Tesla from Hertz, which said that Tesla's the only automaker capable of making electric vehicles at this kind of scale. And it also, it's a big step forward in the mainstreaming or the mainstream adoption of EVs. Hertz wants to electrify its entire fleet over time. And, first off, it's turned to Tesla to do that.
And Peter, it paves the way, I guess, too, for more mainstream EV adoption. What are we hearing?
Yeah, I think it certainly does. For a lot of people, they probably haven't had the opportunity to drive a Tesla or an electric vehicle. And this will give them the chance to rent one. Or, when you rent a car, sometimes you rent something a bit fancier than you own or regularly drive. So I think for a lot of people, it's almost going to be like a gateway into electric vehicles and a chance for them to drive one, test one out, and it could start to, sway people who have been a bit reluctant or just haven't had the opportunity to drive one.
All right, our transport editor, Peter Verco, with us. And of course, as we saw the stock jump, Tesla as much as 9.8% in this biggest move since March, it really added to this $1 trillion valuation. What does that mean for Elon Musk? Well, he is now expanding his wealth. Look at that, $288.6 billion, the top of the pile there on Rich Go, surpassing Jeff Bezos, who is under $200 billion. All right, let's go back to Hong Kong, check in on the first word headlines from around the world with Annabelle Jewellers. Annabelle.
Thanks, Jules. We're hearing at least two holders of Evergrande's 8.25% dollar note maturing March 2022 received interest before the end of the grace period on Saturday. The grace period for another interest payment ends this Friday. Evergrande creditors, they are still bracing for an eventual debt restructuring that could rank among the largest ever in China. Turkey's president has dropped his demand for 10 Western ambassadors to be expelled. Recep Tayyip Erdogan said the envoys had issued a statement undoing what he called the slander caused by their earlier demand. That was for Turkey to release a business and government critic who's been in jail for 4 years. The US has issued new travel regulations requiring proof of vaccination against COVID-19 along with a recent negative test. However, people from countries with low vaccine supplies who aren't travelling on tourist visas and are under 18 will be exempt. The new rules, which are effective from November 8th, lift the severe travel restrictions on people from China, India and much of Europe. As we mentioned, Facebook shares gained in late trade after reporting strong user growth in its social media apps and after announcing a share buyback of as much as $50 billion. In the earnings call, CEO Mark Zuckerberg flagged revenue headwinds stemming from Apple's restrictions on consumer data collection. He also said negative press around Facebook was a coordinated effort to paint a false picture about the company.
As expected, we did experience revenue headwinds this quarter, including from Apple's changes that are not only negatively affecting our business, but millions of small businesses and what is already a difficult time for them in the economy.
And El Salvador's digital Bitcoin wallet, Chivo, has removed pricing features that allowed users to make rapid profits on trading. The move is part of efforts to crack down on speculation involving the world's biggest cryptocurrency. Last month, the country became the first to officially adopt Bitcoin, and the government's Chivo wallet sparked a surge in day trading as citizens bought dips and sold rallies. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Annabelle Jewellers. This is Bloomberg. Jules?
Thanks, Annabelle. Coming up later in the show, we break third quarter earnings from UBS. How will the Swiss lenders' numbers compare to the strong earnings season we've seen from US peers? We find out at 8:45 Dubai time, then hear from CEO Ralph Hammers at 10 a.m. Plus, some big interviews from the Future Investment Initiative in Riyadh. Investcorp co-CEO Hazem Ben Gassim joins us later this hour. We have more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
When you reorganize and declutter, we're probably the first thing you decide to keep.
Is there any serious contemplation of sanctions against China?
Detailed financial and business reporting.
Tell us more about your customers and how they're doing now.
Expert analysis.
You're basically just changing a $5 bill into 5 ones.
Definitely essential.
Looking at high yield, where does that take you these days?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. The composer Joseph Haydn famously said, "I listened more than I studied."
It sounds like a law school hypothetical.
Here at Bloomberg, it's the same thing.
Do you maintain that low rate regime? Can you see out 2 years?
How do you build a strategy with that eventuality in mind?
Experts, information, news.
The push sets up a potential fight.
What do we know about how it will go public?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. The only way to start the morning is with optimism.
The jobs recovery was sluggish. A lot of people agree on that.
Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrow, and Lisa Abramowitz.
Finally, we got some Abramowitz gloom to get in there.
The ultimate sell signal might be when Lisa capitulates.
Bloomberg Surveillance. Must listen, must watch.
Lisa, your data point, go.
Tom, you're great. Never change.
Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television. There are a lot of ways to look at the world right now.
Interesting that you've got an overweight on Hong Kong.
And the more of them you can access, the better.
What has to be his strategy?
Perspective.
Who's doing school best?
Clarity.
How do we get it so that the benefits get to everybody?
Expertise.
He seems to have exactly the right combination. It's character plus policy.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg. The world is listening.
It's an earnings story.
That's been powering the market higher.
Stock multiples are actually down over the last year.
This idea of rising rates?
Rising interest rates is a sign of confidence in the economy, not a problem for stocks.
Every quarter point hike by any central bank has a magnified impact on financial conditions.
Considering pulling back and tightening monetary policy.
We don't think that there's a lot of pain trade in seeing rates go much higher.
And that's been the story over the last month.
The way you combat that is with record profits.
Our profits are going to continue to be quite robust.
As we move our way through earnings season,
companies are coming through pretty strong.
You're seeing tremendous amount of money continue to come into the financial markets.
That was some of our earlier guests on the solid earnings season so far, the strong results and progress on a US infrastructure deal, supporting sentiment even as the inflation debate continues to heat up. And this is China says it had candid talks with the US on macroeconomic policies with the world's recovery currently at a critical juncture. Beijing saying Vice Premier Liu He also discussed tariffs and sanctions in a call with Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Let's bring in Stephen Bell, MD for Global Macro at BMO Global Asset Management. Stephen, great to see you. So we have been continuing to see this ratchet high, particularly in the S&P 500, holding at these records. Is it a case of nowhere else to hide, or is it really that the earnings are this good?
Yeah, it's earnings versus interest rates. And I think your clips there highlighted it very well. Now, I should say one thing. We in the markets are getting a bit cynical about companies beating their earnings estimates because the analyst estimates are obviously too low. Most obviously in the banking sector, where analysts are supposedly saying they're going to write bigger provisions for loan losses, whereas in fact they're doing the opposite. But more generally, if you look at the Bloomberg Outlook Index for earnings, that has turned positive again, and that is a plus. So despite supply shortages, soaring input costs, labour shortages, and rising interest rates, corporates are saying the earnings outlook is improving, and that means they're pushing through price increases, protecting their margins. And of course, that means inflation's going up. But despite all, so that's a headwind, but it's still a positive outlook for equities, in my opinion. Well,
let's talk, Stephen, then about the inflation picture. And we do have a chart to show our GTV customers, as well as we're continuing to see US inflation expectations rising. Is there a concern here that central banks are at risk of losing control? Because a lot of these price pressures, as you mentioned, are really being pushed higher by the supply chain issues rather than perhaps where we thought we'd be at this point in the cycle, say, productivity.
Well, that's a great chart. And the key metric that the Federal Reserve watch are the five-year forward rate, which until just a couple of weeks was a little bit above 2%. Now, their target for the personal consumer's expenditure deflator would therefore be right on that number. Now it's risen above, and so the markets are beginning to lose, well, the Fed's losing a bit of credibility because people are saying inflation is going to sustain a move after all these oil price rises have washed through above 2%. And what we're seeing now is a sort of second wave of inflation pressures, which are more enduring. Rent, shelter, that's looking to rise strongly, and wages are picking up. And in particular, the Atlanta Fed survey, the latest numbers came out last week, and they rose again to a number over 4% that's not consistent with their 2% inflation target. So transitory, that word should not be used again. The inflationary pressures are clear and present, and the Fed will have to act. And the only question is, how quickly and how far will they act?
Yeah, okay, a dirty word, as Raphael Bostic put it. Let's have a look, though, at what we're seeing in the bond market, because some key indicators flashing there. Is a global bond market meltdown perhaps only a matter of time then?
Well, meltdown has to be, I'm not sure if you'd use that word. The key thing for risk assets, in a way, is that the TIPS yield, real interest rates, that's still very negative. It's -1, and that's particularly good for growth stocks. So although nominal rates have risen, they've risen entirely because of break-even inflation. And so real rates, actually, it surprised me, real rates have stayed very, very low, negative -1 at the 10 years, and that's supportive for risk assets. So bond yields are rising from extraordinarily low levels, and I think they're going higher.
You were talking there about when we see the Fed act. This is obviously the key market mover, and policy decisions perhaps in December too. How important, is the guidance from the ECB's Christine Lagarde this Thursday in terms of what we see from the ECB?
So the ECB have also seen a rise in break-even inflation, by the way. For the first time, their five-year forward number has hit their target of 2%, the first time since the currency existed. But going back to your question, what the ECB are going to tell us, I think, is prepare us for the next meeting where they're going to reduce their asset purchase program. And they've got far more time because the inflationary pressures, well, they start from a lower base and they're not quite as acute in Europe. It would be good news for them if inflation could sustain a move, not at the headline rates they have at the moment, but sustain a move at 2%, because they've been struggling to reach that for some time. So it's a much slower burn story in Europe, where, of course, many bond yields and official rates are negative.
How concerned are you about the power crunch, particularly as we see soaring energy prices, and where do you see oil go?
Oh, well, where do I see oil go? That's a tricky one. There's an acute shortage at the moment because the recovery's been very strong. People are flying again, especially in the United States. So the pressures in the near term with low inventories are upwards. Longer term, actually, prices are going to go back down again, I reckon. The futures market is telling us below 60 in 5 years, below 70 in 5 years' time. And I think that's a realistic number. Supply from the US shale oil industry is beginning to, well, it is rising. So I think we will see both a reduction in demand and an increase in supply to balance out what is currently, obviously, a very tight market.
We're also looking to more sustainable alternatives too, and COP26 coming up in Glasgow next week. Is this a market-moving event in your view, and what kind of forecasts or projections are you expecting to come through from nations? We heard from the likes of Australia today finally coming through with their emissions target.
Well, many people are saying that the rise in oil prices, and even more acute rise in natural gas prices, is a symptom of our addiction to fossil fuels. And it's clear that in many areas, I mean, electricity generation being the obvious one for oil, that countries have moved away from fossil fuels. Coal and oil are much smaller in the developed world, certainly as a source of electricity generation. Transport is the big user, and that is also something where we're beginning to see a movement away. You've been covering this extraordinary announcement with respect to Tesla, but oil is going to be with us for a long, long time. And it won't be substituted away in the chemical industry. So it's going to continue moving away. And the world economy is growing. The other aspect of this is strong economic growth. And economic growth, particularly in the developed world, uses quite a lot of oil.
But if we look at China, growth there slowing, and you've had a raft of people. We had Goldman Sachs again cutting their forecast for 2022 growth. I was mentioning as well the talks between the US and China earlier. What kind of investability, or how investable do you see China at the moment amidst this slowdown?
So we're having a big debate at BMO Global Asset Management about China. I'm negative on the economy. We see it in the West as a sort of export-led growth model. It's actually a construction-led growth model. And that construction has gone too far. And all the stories that you're covering about Evergrande and other property companies, they are in for a medium-term drag from a sector that's been a big source of growth, because that urbanization is pretty much done. The sector's over-leveraged. And I don't know of ever of a case where you've had a property problem that hasn't had a medium-term drag in the economy. Yes, the numbers for the third quarter were, temporarily hurt by power outages and all sorts of other problems. I think the longer-term growth outlook for China is slower growth. And the president said he wanted quality not quantity. Well, he's not going to get much quantity, in my opinion. And that's a major change in the structural outlook for China. The authorities have not reacted to this property crisis. And I think that's a sensible move, because every time they've responded to it before, they've ended up making the problem worse. So it's going to be a tough few years for China.
Stephen, we thank you for your time and getting up so early for us in London. Stephen Bell, MD for Global Macro at BMO Global Asset Management. Plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
Economics.
All this doom and gloom is out there.
Finance.
Do you see this as a technical correction?
Investment.
What are you looking at to give you some sort of compass through this period?
The Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast.
Lots and lots of talk about what the Fed should and shouldn't do.
Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrow, Lisa Abramowitz, and the names that shape the world's markets.
We speak with Professor Schiller of Yale University.
Bloomberg Surveillance. Listen today at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts. The best of Bloomberg Business Week every business day.
Sales activity soaring.
The Bloomberg Business Week podcast with Carol Messer and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovich.
What does an Apple-developed car look like?
The day's breaking global business, finance, and tech news, along with smart analysis.
This stock has been on a tear.
The Bloomberg Business Week podcast.
Can we just get like 20 seconds from you on Bitcoin?
Listen today on BloombergRadio.com, the Bloomberg Business app, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts. The market's in focus every business day. The Bloomberg Markets Podcast with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller.
Are there some sectors that you want to have more or less exposure to? We've got to vaccinate the whole world.
Analysis of the day's Wall Street action.
What's the thought on Apple here?
From Bloomberg Intelligence, Bloomberg Opinion, and influential newsmakers.
The bond market was the boss.
Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller. Subscribe today at BloombergRadio.com, the Bloomberg Business app, or iTunes. Before and after the pandemic.
Is it driven by politics or by science?
That may be how we keep track of our lives from here on out.
What do you think the political effects of that impatience will be?
And through it all, there's been Bloomberg.
We begin on Capitol Hill.
The most accurate business, world, and healthcare news before and after.
The fundamentals do not justify this price action.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Turkey's President Erdogan has backed down from a directive that would have expelled diplomats from 10 countries, including the US and Germany. The decision quelled a sharp decline in the lira yesterday. Simone Foxman joins us with more. Simone, the lira has breathed a sigh of relief for now, but what are the implications beyond that immediate market move?
Yeah, well, the question here for us is, what does this do long term to relations between Turkey and these the envoys of these countries? Both the United States, one of them, Germany, France. How does this affect long term relations? But at least right now, the sign was Erdogan was backing down. He said that these countries had issued statements, essentially walking back their comments here that had set off this dispute, but that's not really the case. What these embassies had said was that they respect the Vienna Accord and they respect the fact that they're not supposed to meddle in foreign affairs. For Erdogan, he may see a short-term boost in his popularity, particularly because he's been nationally portrayed as having set this up as an us versus them, us versus foreign powers sort of situation. But in the long term, we are going to see foreign powers a little bit more concerned about Turkey's sort of knee-jerk reactions to various policies, and that may befuddle essentially relations in terms of moving forward on other things. That could weigh on the lira. We saw a sharp spike in yields as well yesterday, so that's something the bond markets could be watching. But at least for now, we've seen that dramatic reaction come down a little bit in the last couple of hours.
And Simone, you're in Saudi Arabia, the kingdom rolling out another climate initiative, this time on carbon capture. What has been the takeaway here?
Yeah, a fund to support research into carbon sequestration, also to provide cooking fuels, cleaner cooking fuels to people as a sort of food security initiative. This fund is going to be about $10.4 billion, and Saudi Arabia's crown prince has said he'll contribute 15% of that. But the interesting thing for me here is carbon sequestration. This was a key theme of the events we've seen over the past few days, the Saudi Green Initiative, and then yesterday's Middle East Green Initiative, which brought in leaders of various other countries in the region. Even Nigeria's energy minister telling me earlier this week that carbon sequestration key to really moving through the energy transition. And if people just put enough money in research into those kinds of technologies, they do very well. The kind of money that they put into renewables, we'd see some more broader technological advances. But this is going to be a real focus at COP26 because scientists are dubious of carbon sequestration technology. They raised that in their IPCC report, the one that governs essentially and sets the theme for these talks that we're going to be seeing coming up. Saudi Arabia clearly getting on the bandwagon, really pushing this carbon sequestration idea. So we'll have to see how controversial of an issue this is when we do get to Glasgow.
And we're also getting new details about what seems like never-ending talks to try and bring Iran back to the negotiating table on its nuclear deal. What is the latest?
Yeah, that's right. Ali Bagheri Khani, he's the deputy foreign minister who's really in charge of negotiations for Iran. He's going to go to Brussels on Wednesday, and there he's going to meet with the EU envoy Enrique Mora to discuss how to get back to a round of talks in Vienna, in direct talks with the U.S. and the other powers that are part of the 2015 nuclear deal. How to get back to that 2015 nuclear deal. So talks to get back to talks, essentially. At the moment, we don't have a date set for that, but any discussion here positive. Meanwhile, the U.S. really ramping up the temperature and adding, saying that it has other plans in mind if Iran does not cooperate and does not start being more constructive and does not stop procrastinating.
All right, talk some more. Simone, thank you. Simone Foxman with us in Riyadh. All right, let's have a look at what we're seeing in market action. It certainly is a risk-on session. We saw the S&P 500 hit a record, and you've got S&P futures suggesting further gains for Wall Street as we see gains coming through here in Asia. This as we see progress on President Biden's economic agenda and also traders digesting this video call between China's Vice Premier Liu He and US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Simone was mentioning there those talks about Iran. You do have NYMEX crude oil just under $84 a barrel, and the yield on your 10-year is just under 1.64% at the moment. But certainly seeing a lot of these tech players rally in Asia, SK Hynix among them too, and we had Facebook rising in after-hours trade. Plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
If knowledge is power, the Bloomberg Terminal is your power up, connecting you to the real-time financial news, data, and analytics that can take your workflow to the next level. Power up at Bloomberg.com/professional.
When will you be able to go to a meeting where nobody smells like hand sanitizer? Who knows? But we can give you the latest business and financial news, fragrance-free.
Let's tease out some of what you just said.
Are there tools in the toolbox for the Fed?
Does that point to the need for continued monetary support?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
You do realize the mark that this is having on a younger generation.
Bloomberg, the world is listening.
I want to get back to being in my community group.
I want to continue having a soccer season.
So I can throw parties again.
So I can go to her parties.
It'd really be nice to dine in instead of getting delivery for a change.
So I can feel safe and protected for myself and my students.
We each have our own reason for why we're getting vaccinated against COVID-19. What will yours be? Visit GetVaccineAnswers.org for information on the COVID-19 vaccines. It's up to you. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Economics.
Chairman Powell looks brilliant.
Finance.
Some breaking news for you. A share sale.
Investment.
The narrative of the reopening trade has changed.
The Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast.
Do you want some volatility, Tom?
Please.
Do you want me to go there?
Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrow, Lisa Abramowitz, and the names that shape the world's markets.
Joseph Stiglitz of Columbia University, the laureate.
Bloomberg Surveillance. Listen today at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts.
To some, the sound of a baby babbling doesn't mean much, but that's not true. They're testing out vowels and consonants and trying different sounds. And by 12 months, their babbling is beginning to take on meaning, especially if there's no babbling at all. Little to no babbling by 12 months or later is just one of the possible signs of autism in children. Learn more at autismspeaks.org. Brought to you by Autism Speaks and the Ad Council.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Middle East. Our top stories this morning. Asia-Pacific stocks rise after a record close on the S&P 500. Corporate earnings and progress on President Biden's economic agenda lift sentiment, even as the debate over inflation risks intensifies. Tesla hits $1 trillion valuation mark as Hertz orders 100,000 vehicles. Meanwhile, Facebook shares gain in late trading on strong user growth and the promise of a $50 billion stock buyback. A U-turn in Turkey. President Erdogan drops his demand for 10 Western ambassadors to be expelled. And UBS earnings are due this hour. Can the Swiss lender match the strong numbers we've seen from US banks so far this season? We find out in about 15 minutes' time and hear from the CEO later today. Well, it is a risk-on session as we see US futures rise as well after a record on Wall Street. Let's get the latest market action in Asia. Annabelle Drewlers joins us from our Hong Kong studio. Annabelle.
Thanks, Jules. Well, you mentioned it there in the headlines. Earnings certainly helping to boost sentiment here in Asia from the likes of Facebook and others. So investors really brushing aside these concerns that they have around inflation and instead looking at these signals of growth that we're seeing as well coming through. So you're seeing most benchmarks in the region higher today, led high by the Nikkei over in Japan. We're seeing a broad-based sector rally there. All indexes in the green. Meanwhile, the Kospi also looking a little high. We did have that cooler third quarter GDP reading, but still we're seeing some strong sentiment there today. The CSI 300 and the Hang Seng, they are a little bit weaker today, and there are still concerns that we're seeing around the property sector, particularly with the developer Modern Land. This is the latest here saying that it has missed a payment that was due on a bond on Monday, but we have seen dollar bond defaults now hitting a record in China. Jules.
And Annabelle, we were talking about this big order for Tesla from Hertz. What's been the reaction in Asia?
That's right. Well, a 100,000 vehicle order from Hertz. It certainly helped Tesla enter the $1 trillion club, but it is also providing a boost to its suppliers here in Asia, particularly Panasonic. Now, it was a double day really for Panasonic because they also unveiled a next generation battery that they're planning to supply to Tesla. So they were seeing the stock there trade at levels that we haven't seen since 2018. Other makers, though, are higher as well, including Ningbo Shusheng, which does derive about 40% of its revenue from Tesla. Battery supplier CATL, though, a little weaker today. Jules.
Annabelle, thank you. Well, UBS is considering an end to the standalone status of its global family office, which caters to its richest clients. We're also looking ahead to the lender's latest results, and Bloomberg senior editor Jonas Bergman joins us now. Jonas, what are we expecting to see in terms of earnings for UBS?
Well, yeah, I mean, after the largely stellar reports from the U.S., it will be interesting to see if UBS can deliver in the same manner. Consensus shows it will probably see a double-digit gain in earnings from a year earlier, but it had strong comparables to look at last year. And so it looks, unlikely that it will replicate the jump it saw in the second quarter. That said, UBS is in a sweet spot with a heavy focus on wealth management and investment banking. Equity trading, M&A activity boosted most banks in the past quarter, even as lending growth and the interest rate environment remain challenging for most of them.
So talk us through some of the main drivers that we're expecting from this report, because a lot of analysts have turned quite optimistic about the stock in general.
Yeah, the stock is up quite a bit this year. And as I said, M&A, is at a record pace. Equity trading, investment banking is going gangbusters for most of them. UBS also has a healthy focus on wealth management, so we'll be looking at, in particularly Asia, if they can sort of keep growing their assets under management and gaining new clients in a region which, despite all the issues, political turmoil, etc., is showing still a pretty sizable growth in wealthy people across Asia.
All right, Bloomberg Senior Editor Jonas Bergman with us. Thank you so much. All right, let's get out now to the Future Investment Initiative event in Riyadh, where Bloomberg's Youssef Gamil Eldin is standing by. Youssef, I'm keeping your seat warm, not for long, but you're with a very special guest today.
Yeah, just don't get too comfy in that seat, Jules. Yes, the FII gets underway here in Riyadh with top government officials and CEOs from all around the world congregating here to discuss the agenda on the road ahead for the investing world for 2022. Let's talk to the biggest private equity and alternative asset manager, that is Investcorp. They manage about $40 billion worth with, of course, ambition to grow much more to $100 billion in the next few years. The co-CEO joins us here now on our set, Hazem Ben Ghasem. Thank you for making it to the set. Hazem, let me get a bit of a sense from you how your priorities have shifted as we try and accelerate out of the COVID trough.
Well, first, good morning, Youssef, and thank you for having me on your program. First, let me say that in terms of priority, first and foremost is that of our employees and our constituencies. And I'm very pleased to see that we have managed that COVID crisis well. Our employees are in good health. We are, as importantly today, looking at perhaps adapting our working practices. And that is perhaps one of the biggest shifts post-COVID is flying for 6 hours to attend a 3-hour board meeting, having internal, external meetings. So I think that the ease of use of technology is probably one of the biggest fundamental change in our habits and the way we go about our business. Second of all, moving on to the investing world, post-COVID, the markets continue to be exceptionally robust. We have taken advantage of that opportunity. We have sold about $6 billion worth of exits, both primarily in our private equity and real estate front. It is very difficult to look at a market as frothy as it is today with the availability of credit, with the capital markets. In a way, we have taken advantage of that. Third of all, on the investing front, and I'm pleased to see that across the board, from North America all the way to China and Southeast Asia, markets continue to be quite healthy. Asset value continue to increase. Our portfolio businesses, 80 in total, on average, overall, they have continued to be quite robust.
Yeah. Let me flesh that out a bit more in terms of new opportunities that may be emerging, and one of them is ESG and sort of the move to net zero from quite a few countries. We saw this with Saudi Arabia just a couple of days ago. Are you getting in on the action as well?
Well, first of all, I hope that ESG boils down to responsibility, being a responsible investor, being responsible to our employees, our investors, our constituencies, and the employees of our various businesses. I hope ESG has been not a topic of today, but it's a topic of since the beginning of investing. I applaud particularly the European institutional investors who have been one of the biggest advocates and push into this front. We Investcorp are proud in ourselves and to have been a responsible investor since our formation in 1982. This is nothing new. This is a continuation of an existing initiative of taking the lead on diversity. Investcorp today has 45 different nationalities within its base, but also taking the lead in acting responsibly. Acting responsibly in investing is anything from leverage, not excess leverage in businesses, protecting pension liabilities within businesses, but also acting responsibly through the life of that journey and making sure that investing is not just about IRR, it is also about taking care of the underlying investors in the businesses which we operate in.
Are you looking at any new tie-ups potentially to create new funds? I mean, in the past, you've tended to look for an arm in the international realm. Are you going to be able to make any new announcements soon on that?
So, Youssef, I'm very pleased to announce today that we will be launching what would be the very first Kingdom of Saudi Arabia pre-IPO PE vehicle. This will be a vehicle which will invest in collaboration with family-owned businesses, preparing them for a listing on the local Tadawul Stock Exchange. We have been one of the most active investors in the Saudi private equity market in the last 12 years, taking 4 businesses public here on the Tadawul, Lijam, Bin Dawood, Lazurde, and Feeb. And I'm so honored that with those IPOs, we had literally $40 billion worth of demand for those underlying businesses. The market is terrific in the local markets. There's a room for a thriving private equity market and ultimately a thriving public market. Yeah. And we at Invescorp are very proud to take the lead into this charge.
I mean, Hazem, I take a look at the amount of liquidity that's sloshing around in the Saudi market. It's driving up demand, it's driving up valuations. The conversations that I've had in the run-up to this show that there is concern that the market might be mispricing risk. What do you say to that?
So first, liquidity has always been in the region. However, that liquidity in large part has been invested in many other parts of the world. And I'm very pleased to see that the local investors, both institutional and retail, are starting to direct a meaningful portion of their liquidity into the local markets. There are some terrific businesses locally, some terrific momentums, and with the Vision 2030 initiative, there are some truly the prospects for the kingdom are quite exciting. And I do not blame the local investors for want to invest their capital into the local markets.
We're looking to central banks and governments around the world to see what they're going to do with their massive stimulus plans. And at the moment, it looks like that might get withdrawn. With it could come a new wave of financial distress. Is that a scenario you've been studying a bit more closely, and what kind of opportunities could emerge?
Yeah. So first, Yusuf, let's not forget that those financial stimulus that they were put in place were there for very good reason, to support a meaningful part of the population that have fallen on hard times during the COVID crisis. So regardless of the outcome, that was the right strategy, the right direction to effectively protect the most vulnerable in our society. Now, moving from that, no doubt about it, with excess liquidity in the market, with the current interest rate environment, they're going to take some time for the market to work itself off those initiatives. That liquidity will most likely put a pressure on asset valuation globally. We do not see that today across the board, all asset classes. As we go forward, I think what we see is there is a clear partnership between the public and the private sector to make sure that as we move into our second phase of the COVID recovery, it is done in a very steady and measured manner. Do we expect another 2008 financial crisis, or I don't think so. I think the economy, the fundamental global economy is a solid one today, and that is the anchor driver of any crises or any movements.
You know, one of the asset classes that has benefited tremendously from very low interest rates is, of course, real estate. Invescorp is the largest Gulf investor in U.S. property. Are you recalibrating on that front, given how far we've come in a very short amount of time?
First of all, Yusuf, you're correct. We have been not only the largest Gulf investor, but we have been consistently one of the top 5 foreign investors in U.S. real estate, investing about $2 billion a year in North America and about $500 million in Europe. And I hope that momentum will continue into the GCC in the medium term. Real estate have been one of our most successful asset classes, generating about an 18% return to our investors consistently over the last 12 years in a very measured and thoughtful manner. Certain assets, certain aspects of real estate will continue to have very solid momentum, particularly those that follow the new economy. We have had a terrific success investing in warehouse and logistics assets, and that momentum seems to be there. I expect that momentum to continue in the GCC as well.
Hazem, thank you very much for running us through some of those ideas and the big picture. That's Hazem bin Qasim. He is the co-CEO at Invescorp. Much more to come throughout the day, Jules. For now, back to you.
Thanks, Yusuf. Great conversation. Just getting some lines as well from South Korea, I should say. The Vice Minister Lee speaking here in a meeting, saying that South Korea, a fuel tax cut will help lower prices by 0.33 percentage points a month. South Korea saying that this lower fuel tax will cut the consumer burden by about 2.5 trillion won. So we're continuing to monitor these lines coming through from South Korea's Vice Finance Minister Lee commenting in a meeting here. And the Kospi is moving high. That's a broader theme of risk on. Coming up next, we are going to break the UBS earnings. Can the Swiss lender match the strong numbers we've been seeing from US banks so far this season? We'll find out soon. This is Bloomberg.
discovered that you were meant for the business world.
Have you been getting a lot of inquiries from employers?
And then you started looking for the best sources of information.
Technology is challenging the regulators.
Doctors use kind of a virtual reality look.
I feel like the world is courting Elon Musk.
Which is how you got here.
How are other bankers restricted now?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Take a not-so-random walk through hot topics in markets and finance. Listen to Odd Lots, a weekly Bloomberg podcast hosted by Joe Weisenthal and Tracy Alloway. Odd Lots explores everything from how the Seinfeld TV show can teach you about economics to why the Federal Reserve blundered by letting Lehman Brothers fail. The Odd Lots podcast, available every Monday on the Bloomberg Terminal, Bloomberg.com, iTunes, SoundCloud, and whatever app you use to browse podcasts.
Are you interested in a challenging and exciting career? One where you can be part of solving complex challenges across industries and geographies. Bloomberg's ever-expanding technology, data, news, and media services foster innovation, empower clients, and offer nearly limitless opportunities for career growth. Visit Bloomberg.com/careers today to view our current job opportunities. Bloomberg LP is an equal opportunity employer. The address once again is Bloomberg.com/careers.
We are just getting numbers out of UBS. What a beat. Third quarter net income coming in at $2.28 billion versus estimates of $1.55 billion. This as we continue to see a substantial beat on this group net income. The best result since about 2007 we're hearing, or since the great financial crisis. Also impressive what we're seeing is the investment bank performance of more than $800 million. This is versus estimates of under $500 million. And the wealth management, UBS largest single division by profits, coming in strongly, as we mentioned, at $1.5 billion. This was above estimates of $1.2 billion. You saw new net fee generating assets. This is the key metric for the division, coming in at $18.8 billion, with inflows in nearly all regions, recurring net fee income jumping by 23%. So a very strong beat coming through from UBS. The third quarter wealth management, as I mentioned as well, the investment bank pre-tax all beating estimates. And UBS saying it's planning to buy back up to $600 million of shares during the fourth quarter. It will give a strategic update on February 1st. Third quarter global markets revenue was down by about 7%, while you saw global banking up by about 22%. And as I mentioned, that third quarter wealth management net new fee generating assets coming in at $18.8 billion. Just trying to get some analysis from some of our colleagues who are writing on the T-Live blog on Bloomberg, essentially just saying this is a pretty substantial beat, and as I mentioned, perhaps the best result that we have seen since 2007 or the great financial crisis. It comes after we'd seen RBC upgrading UBS to outperform from sector perform last month. The stock also a top pick for analysts at JP Morgan. They remain overweight European banks in general, and Credit Suisse analysts have been looking for a strong result here coming through from UBS. We'll be hearing from the UBS CEO, Ralph Hamers, at 10 a.m. Dubai time. That is 2 p.m. here in Singapore, and 7 a.m. in London on that impressive beat. All right, the South African power company Eskom has announced this morning that it will extend rolling blackouts from Tuesday to Saturday as it faces a shortage of generation capacity. The utility supplies 90% of the country's electricity, chiefly by burning coal, but power shortages may compromise the speed of its transition of renewables. Simone Foxman spoke to the interim chair at the Saudi Green Initiative in Riyadh and asked him about how natural gas factors into its energy transition plans.
What we are planning to do, obviously, is to transition into renewable. And in the process of that, we may have to go through gas. I don't think I've got the figures, the breakdown of the figures as to how we go through there. But like many countries, I think you can't jump from one to the other. I think you have to find an intermediary. And it seems like natural gas is going to be that intermediate.
Well, I understand that envoys, climate envoys from some Western countries, the U.S., Britain, France, Germany, have been in South Africa speaking about potentially financing some projects as part of the transition.
Yes.
Tell me where those talks are right now.
I actually met with about 4 of the ambassadors that are going to be participating in the COP26, and they came to see us at ESCOM to see the potential for funding ESCOM, as we have a strategy, but also as we are the biggest emitter of carbon in the country, so we are the biggest polluter. I think we are looking, to the developed nations that had visited South Africa. I think it is Britain, France, Germany, the EU. I think they seem to have a pot of money that is allocated or that is designed to fund countries that are able, I think, to reduce carbon emission. And South Africa, I think, has got one of the greatest potential to be able to do that.
And that was ESCOM's interim chair speaking to Bloomberg's Simone Foxman in Riyadh. We have plenty more ahead. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
You know the difference between your bank and the banking business.
The new chief executive will take the bank in a different direction.
Your clothes and the fashion industry.
This is the new look of retail.
Your house and the real estate market.
Is that something you see reflected in the real estate business?
So do we. Bloomberg, for your professional side.
Is the U.S. really that immune to some of those influences?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business, Radio.com, and iHeartRadio apps, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. When will you be able to go to a meeting where nobody smells like hand sanitizer? Who knows? But we can give you the latest business and financial news, fragrance-free.
Let's tease out some of what you just said.
Are there tools in the toolbox for the Fed?
Does that point to the need for continued monetary support?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
You do realize the mark that this is having on a younger generation.
Bloomberg, the world is listening. Start your market day with Bloomberg Surveillance.
The bond market, it's a really interesting soup.
Tom Keene, Jonathan Ferro, and Lisa Abramowitz.
Isn't your base case the worst case scenario for most?
Who says finance can't be fun?
Who's in the zoo, guys? Which one of us?
I think it's pretty clear who's in the zoo.
Bloomberg Surveillance. Must listen, must watch.
I think they made a great decision separating us both.
Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television.
You're watching Bloomberg Daybreak Middle East. Let's recap those UBS numbers because third quarter net income was a big beat, $2.28 billion versus estimates of $1.55 billion. UBS, though, did say that investor sentiment remained positive in the third quarter, but they saw lower client activity levels in the fourth quarter, or they see rather in the fourth quarter versus the third quarter. This is we're continuing to see as well these indications of rising inflation. UBS saying that these were an extra concern, but they plan on buying back up to $600 million of shares during the fourth quarter, and they'll give a strategic update on February 1st. We also saw third quarter global markets revenue down about 7%. Global banking was up about 22%. Let's hear now, though, from the Facebook CEO, Mark Zuckerberg.
As expected, we did experience revenue headwinds this quarter, including from Apple's changes that are not only negatively affecting our business, but millions of small businesses and what is already a difficult time for them in the economy.
And that was Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg there on the issues stemming from Apple's restrictions on consumer data collection. And this after the tech giant reported strong user growth in its social media apps and announced a share buyback of as much as $50 billion. Joining us with the details is Laura Wright in our London studio. Laura, good morning. What did the top line results show and how did Facebook react after the market?
Thanks, Juliet. Well, it's really been a crescendo of negative news flow leading up to these results, and analysts wanted to see what Facebook is going to do to diversify but also sustain its advertising revenues. So total revenue came in at $29 billion. That's up 35% year on year, slightly below analyst projections, and also estimates for fourth quarter revenue came in at the lower range. Daily and monthly active users, that was also broadly in line with expectations. But this revenue growth, well, it was primarily dampened by the iOS privacy changes that Apple installed. It's negligible for companies like Alphabet, but a real hit to Facebook. And we saw that sell-off from Snap on Friday.
What were some of the other interesting takeaways when you delved through the report, Laura?
Well, we learned that Facebook is aiming for a $50 billion share buyback. In the third quarter alone, they bought back $14 billion of shares. What's really unique is this investment in virtual reality, the Oculus headset, that collaboration with Ray-Bans on smart glasses. Facebook is really investing in a future that we can't imagine at this stage. And actually, they're going to separate out in the next earnings report this virtual reality side of the business. But the privacy changes, that is a worry for investors in the future because it could impact advertising direct market.
We did see a move higher in shares after hours, so I'm guessing investors like this. But what else has been the reaction from investors?
Well, I spoke with one investor yesterday, Freddie Late, and for him, look, Facebook is trading inexpensively, 18 times forward earnings. And he thinks that this move from bricks and mortar stores, which has been accelerated by the pandemic, to online only, Facebook is really going to be a beneficiary of this change. And he thinks that for advertisers, Facebook is really the place to be. It's essentially a walled garden of first-hand data collected by Facebook. So really, it's about volume and price. Can Facebook increase the price for advertisers for B2B and C2C?
All right, Laura Wright in London. Mainly a thumbs up there from investors for Facebook. All right, let's go back to UBS because we have been watching these numbers after the third quarter. Net income was a beat, but UBS did see that they see a lower client activity levels in fourth quarter compared with the third quarter. So they're expecting revenues in the fourth quarter of this year to be influenced by seasonal factors such as lower client activity levels. And also that's compared to what we saw in the third quarter, which they say was unusually high levels for a third quarter. UBS saying, well, asset prices remain high. They are seeing supporting recurring fee income in their asset gathering business and the continued uncertainty about the environment, including all these recent policy changes that we are facing in China. So that could see the economic recovery affect both asset prices and their client activity levels. Indications they're saying too of rising inflation. We're hearing that from everyone that could lead to more restrictive monetary policy. And so that has been an additional concern for the market. We'll hear more, of course, when we're going to talk to CEO Ralph Hammers later, I should say. And this also came after we saw UBS in talks about ending the standalone status of its global family office. All right, more broadly, we are seeing a risk-on session across markets, I should say. We had, of course, a record on the S&P 500 futures suggesting more gains on Wall Street. And risk-on here in Asia as we see those tech players move higher as well, the likes of SK Hynix. WTI just under $84 a barrel there as we look ahead to the Iran talks, and the yield on your US 10-year just under 1.64%. That wraps it up for Bloomberg Daybreak Middle East, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, live from London, and Danny Berger is next. This is Bloomberg.
When you reorganize and declutter, we're probably the first thing you decide to keep.
Is there any serious contemplation of sanctions against China?
Detailed financial and business reporting.
Tell us more about your customers and how they're doing now.
Expert analysis.
You're basically just changing a $5 bill into 5 ones.
Definitely essential.
Looking at high yield, where does that take you these days?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. The composer Joseph Haydn famously said, "I listened more than I studied."
It sounds like a law school hypothetical.
Here at Bloomberg, it's the same thing.
Do you maintain that low rate regime? Can you see out 2 years?
How do you build a strategy with that eventuality in mind?
Experts, information, news.
The push sets up a potential fight.
What do we know about how it will go public?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscriptions.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the lingo.
Jelly. Jelly adjective. Jelly is a shorter, better way to say jealous. As in, Chloe, I am like so jelly of your unicorn phone case.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt US Kids, and the Ad Council.
To protect her home and family in a disaster, Karen was willing to wade through water, mud, and insurance paperwork.
Yeah, I can do this.
You go, Karen! By simply understanding and updating what her insurance covers and doesn't cover now, she'll be better prepared no matter when disaster strikes. Learn other simple ways to protect your home and family before a natural disaster at ready.gov. That's ready.gov. A message from FEMA and the Ad Council.
Markets, you can't predict them.
The Delta variant is ripping up the playbook.
Investors being in a bit of a fog at the moment.
But when you listen to us, you'll come pretty close.
Let's take a look at those small cap stocks.
We're taking a look at some of the sector winners, the sector losers.
Is this bullish or is it bearish?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Broadcasting 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe for this Tuesday, the 26th of October in London, coming up this hour.
UBS reports $2.3 billion in net income, a substantial beat, and the best result since 2007.
Mark Zuckerberg makes young adults the focus of Facebook as the firm fends off damning reports based on whistleblower evidence.
Erdogan drops the call to expel diplomats, and Australia, one of the world's biggest polluters, finally agrees to go net zero. I'm Leanne Gerrans with World News.
And Chancellor Rishi Sunak has trailed more than £31 billion in new spending in the budget, plus the UK minimum wage will go up to £9.50.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, on DAB Digital Radio London, Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington DC, Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM Channel 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning from London. I'm Caroline Hepkin.
And I'm Tom Mackenzie. You're listening to Daybreak Europe live on London DAB Digital Radio.
Now, we're going to break more from the UBS earnings this morning. They see lower client activity, Tom, in the fourth quarter versus the third quarter. And our colleague Manus Krani is interviewing UBS's CEO, so we'll bring you that sound in just a moment. But also lots on the budget today. A couple of really great guests from the IPPR and from Deloitte to go through, well, what we already know, really, about the budget that's coming tomorrow.
Yeah, there's a lot to be focused on, or a lot to be discussed as Rishi Sunak, the UK Chancellor, leads up to that big announcement. Of course, having pre-announced a lot of details that we're all mulling through as well, including an increase in the minimum wage. So we'll be focused on that and the implications for the UK economy, as some as well speculate that we may be looking to elections potentially as soon as next year. But we'll check in on the markets now, Caroline, after a positive close on Wall Street.
Yeah, absolutely. The S&P 500, of course, hit that new record high on Monday, so up by 0.5% to the highest level ever. And S&P futures right now also climbing to a new record high. Remember, it is mega cap tech stock week. Facebook and Tesla yesterday, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Twitter, all to come. Some 81% of S&P 500 members have now reported better than expected earnings so far. In terms of the Asian markets right now, MSCI Asia Pacific is up by 0.4%. In terms of treasuries, we're fairly steady for treasuries. Treasuries at the moment, US yields on the 10-year at 1.641, so up barely a basis point. Also steady, oil prices $83.90 for WTI crude, up by 0.2%. And just another red flag in terms of China's property market, Modern Land. This morning, we await also lots of reports here in the UK, Reckitt Benckiser, Polymetal, and we also get Whitbread results. So that's a brief look at the markets, Tom.
And you touched on tech earnings. We also have some earnings out of the pharmaceutical sector. We got Novartis, the Swiss pharma company, coming in with a pretty solid beat. Earnings per share for the third quarter coming in at $1.71, well above the estimates of $1.64. Novartis saying that their group guidance is unchanged. They are also looking at a strategic review. They've started a strategic review of the Sandoz part of that business. In terms of net sales for the third quarter, they came in at $13.03 billion, above the estimates of $13 billion. So beating on sales, beating on earnings per share, and starting a strategic review of the Sandoz part of the Novartis business.
OK, let's dive into what the markets show this morning and bring in Bloomberg's cross-asset editor, Joanna Ossinger. Joanna, good to have you on the show. What is the VIX curve telling us about sentiment right now?
Hi, Caroline. It's really pretty steep right now. You know, we have a calming VIX, but then it's showing that there's a lot of uncertainty, particularly as you get into December and January. So it's showing that people are nervous about what's coming down the road. But if you're thinking that the calm might last, for instance, you could, say, sell something related to the VIX and take advantage of those higher levels down the road.
Joanna, where is the focus in the crypto space? We've had a research report talking about the concentration of Bitcoin within the hands of a relatively small group of people. Currently, Bitcoin trading at 62,500. Where is your focus within crypto at this point?
Hey, well, actually, one thing I'm looking at, Bitcoin has been interesting, but it's been a little bit flat lately. So Ether is kind of interesting. The Ethereum network is undergoing an upgrade tomorrow that should help make part of its blockchain more energy efficient and faster as it migrates to the more energy efficient proof of stake system. So it will actually, it's rising, it's outperforming Bitcoin right now, and that should boost sentiment.
OK, interesting. Bitcoin at $62,564. Joanna, thanks so much for being with us this morning. Joanna Ossinger there. And for real-time market commentary and analysis, check out Markets Live, MLIV, on your Bloomberg terminal.
OK, now on to today's top stories. UBS, first, the bank earnings. With UBS posting profit that soared past estimates as the lender benefited from surging fee income at its wealth management and investment bank businesses. Net income of $2.28 billion compared with forecast earnings of $1.55 billion. An investment banking pre-tax profit almost double what analysts had predicted. Meanwhile, UBS is in talks about ending the standalone status of its global family office, a unit that deals with some of its richest clients.
OK, so that from UBS. Meanwhile, Facebook rose in late US trading after the company reported strong overall user growth for its family of apps. But as Bloomberg's Emily Chang reports now from San Francisco, the social network is facing a whirlwind of bad news.
Third quarter user growth for Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp was better than analysts had expected, as was profit. But it was a miss for revenue, and sales forecast also disappointed, with the company citing headwinds from Apple's restrictions on data collection and uncertainty with the post-pandemic economic recovery. All this as new details emerge from documents obtained by Bloomberg from whistleblower Frances Haugen that further bolster her claims that Facebook prioritized profit over user safety and security. In San Francisco, I'm Emily Chang, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Still, Facebook couldn't outrun Tesla's huge gains. The electric vehicle maker surpassed Facebook to become the fifth largest publicly traded company in the US, hitting a market value of $1 trillion. And Elon Musk's personal fortune jumped by $36.2 billion yesterday alone after Hertz placed an order for 100,000 Teslas. Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet has more.
It also comes as filings showed a fresh tranche of options in his moonshot pay package vested. Musk's net worth of $288.6 billion is now greater than the market value of ExxonMobil or Nike. Tesla shares jumped 13% on news of the Hertz order, pushing its market value past $1 trillion. trillion. About two-thirds of Musk's net worth is tied directly to shares and options in the electric car company. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Wow, trillion-dollar company. Well, let's look ahead also to the budget tomorrow here in the UK. The Chancellor Rishi Sunak is expected to announce that the public sector pay freeze will come to an end next year, as well as increasing the national minimum wage. Bloomberg's Ewan Potts reports now.
The pay freeze was announced in November last year and came into force in April. At the time, Chancellor Rishi Sunak said he couldn't justify widespread pay rises when many private sector workers were being hit by the pandemic. But he'll now point to a solid economic recovery and encouraging signs in the labour market as reasons to end the pay pause for more than 2 million workers. The Treasury also said that the legal minimum wage for those aged 23 will increase by 6.6% in April, taking it to £9.50 an hour. In London, I'm Ewan Potts, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Turning our attention globally now, the US and China are trying to work out some of their relationship troubles. The two countries made some progress in their economic and trade negotiations, with Chinese Vice Premier Liu He and US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen holding their second call in about 4 months. While the tone of China's statement about the call was positive, there appears to be little substantive progress on trade or economic issues, including Trump-era tariffs on Chinese exports.
OK, those are some of our top stories. Let's get the latest in global news headlines. Bloomberg's Leanne Gerrans is here. And you continue to cover the story out of Turkey for us. Good morning.
Yes, indeed, Caroline. So we did speak about this yesterday, but we'll start right there where President Erdogan has dropped his demand for 10 Western ambassadors to be expelled from the country, de-escalating a diplomatic row that had shaken the lira. Erdogan said the envoys, including the US ambassador, had issued a statement to undo the, quote, slander caused by their earlier joint demand for Turkey to release a businessman and a government critic. Now, in Australia, one of the world's most criticised polluters has promised it will achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Bloomberg's Georgina Mackay has more.
Prime Minister Scott Morrison announced the target just days before he is scheduled to head to Europe for G20 talks and then the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow. He said Australia had a plan to lower emissions, but it does not include ending its massive fossil fuel sectors. It follows a new round of fractious domestic debate on climate policy. The country is one of the top suppliers of fossil fuels, and the sector accounts for almost a quarter of its export earnings. In Sydney, I'm Georgina Mackay, Bloomberg, Daybreak, Europe.
Meanwhile, the UN is warning the world is still heading for catastrophic levels of global warming, even after recent national climate pledges. The report says without stronger targets, the world will warm 2.7 degrees Celsius, but before 2100. The temperature increase will far exceed the goal of keeping warming below 2 degrees Celsius and preferably less than 1.5 degrees laid out in the Paris Agreement. And Japan's royal family risks running out of members after Princess Mako married her sweetheart. Bloomberg's Isabel Reynolds has more.
A niece of Japan's Emperor Naruhito got married Tuesday and, as Japanese law demands, lost her status as a member of the imperial family. The departure of the former Princess Mako from the household leaves just 17 members, highlighting the problems Japan faces in ensuring succession, given that only men may take the throne. While polls show the vast majority of Japanese have no problem with a female monarch, conservatives in the ruling Liberal Democratic Party have been reluctant to allow any change. In Tokyo, Isabel Reynolds, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Tom.
Leanne, thank you very much indeed. OK, let's get a roundup of the latest sports news now with Chris Cave.
Chelsea boss Thomas Tuchel doesn't feel it would be right to suggest tonight's League Cup tie with Southampton is bottom of his list of priorities this season. The European champions are attempting to defend their Champions League title and have the prospect of the Club World Cup in 2022. They're also top of the Premier League. Former England cricket captain Nasser Hussain believes Ben Stokes' return to the squad for this winter's Ashes series may benefit spinner Jack Leach. The all-rounder has declared himself ready for Australia after taking a break to focus on his mental health and recover from injury. England head to Latvia this evening as they look to continue their perfect start to Women's World Cup qualifying. Northern Ireland host Austria, Wales are at home to Estonia, and Republic of Ireland take on Finland.
So that's your sports roundup from Chris Cave. Still ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Bloomberg's Laura Wright will be joining us to talk about Facebook's earnings. Really a pretty fascinating moment for the company. The whistleblower revelations showing the disparity perhaps between what goes on internally in Facebook and the external business. This comes at a time when Facebook's reported earnings and overall user growth, Tom.
Yeah, certainly that company coming under pressure and will do. That's the expectations on the regulatory front as a result of some of those revelations. Also on the docket this week, you've got Amazon, you've got Apple, you've got Microsoft, so some of the other big names, Twitter as well. And we're going to be passing those results to get an indication of the demand post-pandemic, supply chains, and advertising as well as a result of Apple's iOS changes. So an important focus on the tech sector this week. Facebook, all the details next with Bloomberg's Laura Wright. This is Bloomberg.
The world's financial decision makers connect on the Bloomberg terminal. The buy side and the sell side together, collaborating across markets and countries in real time, sharing ideas, negotiating trades, and forming an influential network of over 325,000 financial professionals that helps power global markets. Isn't it time you join them? Request a demo at bloomberg.com/professional.
Sauter is president of WGI, which provides engineering solutions for public infrastructure and real estate development projects. He's also on the board of overseers for New Jersey Institute of Technology and sees firsthand the intense demand by companies to hire NJIT graduates.
It's become almost cliche to say, but a large percentage of the jobs required in the not too distant future have not even been identified yet. What that means is we need graduates with problem-solving skills and an understanding of technology, technological dexterity, to be the leaders and innovators of the future. NJIT is rising to that challenge. It's not just about the engineering and the science, but it's also about the application of those in problem solving. Understanding how to apply is something that NJIT is outstanding at, and that's one of the reasons that their student body, that their graduates are sought after.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
IBKR is the professional's gateway to the world's markets. IBKR offers commissions starting at $0 for U.S.-listed stocks and ETFs, enhanced price execution via IB Smart Routing, and access to their powerful trader workstation, web, mobile, and API trading platforms. Join clients from over 200 countries and territories to invest globally in stocks, options, futures, forex, bonds, and funds from a single integrated account at the lowest cost at ibkr.com.
My mother was always very active and independent, and she was familiar with her neighborhood. But one day, she stopped at the stop sign for much longer than usual. She wasn't even really sure where she was at.
It's important for you to talk to someone about it. I felt so much better after my son told me, Mom, we'll figure it out.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Manus Cranny.
We've had the HSBC earnings. They're a beat. The bank says it's improved its outlook. That allows it to start a share buyback. And we caught up with the CFO, Ewan Stevenson.
We will and do intend to pay a dividend for the final full year results. In between time, we looked at our capital base. Our Core Tier 1 ratio is 15.9%. We want to get back to being in our target range of 14 to 14.5 over the next year or so. And so today's $2 billion buyback is an important step, I think, and it shows confidence that we have in the underlying performance of the business and outlook, and shows a commitment to try and normalise our capital base.
Now, the top-line beat of $6 billion, in part driven by the credit loss releases. Is this the top of credit loss releases?
Well, we've released about 70% now of the reserve build-up that we had in credit losses last year that we built up in the context of the onset of COVID. We still retain about $1.2 billion of reserve build-up. I think it will be much slower now, what we'll see coming out in the next 2 to 3 quarters.
Hear more conversations like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app. Or check your local cable listings. Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
City of London, I'm Laura Wright with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. S&P 500 futures reaching a record this morning, up 0.2% right now. That is because of a call between Janet Yellen and Liu He materialized. That's perhaps explaining improving relations between the United States and China. Right now, the CSI 300 up 0.1%, but Hong Kong markets, the Hang Seng pulled down due to negative sentiment in the property sector. The Nikkei 225 up 1.7% and the Kospi up 0.8%. Euro Stoxx 50 futures flat to the upside. And the bond space, US benchmark 10-year treasuries yielding 1.640%, up a basis point. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is slightly bid this morning. The Aussie up 0.3% against the dollar at a spot 7514 handle. And in commodities, the thing that keeps us all awake in the morning, coffee up 13% right now, priced at $2 a pound. That is because of lockdowns in Southeast Asia and also rising freight costs having an impact. That's the Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Here's Leanne Gerrans with the World News. Morning, Leanne.
Morning, Laura, and thank you. EU energy ministers are meeting today to discuss how to cushion consumers and companies from soaring power and gas prices. Several countries are calling for the European Union to come up with a new intervention tools. However, a separate group will argue the increase is only temporary and should not lead to hasty changes to the bloc's energy laws and ambitious climate reforms. Now, Boris Johnson had a call with the Russian president ahead of the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow. Vladimir Putin said it was with regret he would not be able to be there in person because of the COVID situation in Russia. Earlier, Boris Johnson admitted he was worried key commitments would not be agreed during the conference that does get underway on Sunday. And finally, the influx of bankers returning to their London offices may have stalled last week, according to the Pret Index. Transaction volume in the City of London and Canary Wharf remained at 84% of pre-pandemic levels for a second straight week. The first time in months there was just no increase. Sales will probably be held back as more employees embrace hybrid working. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Caroline.
Thank you so much, Leanne Gerrans with the World News. Now, Facebook reported strong user growth in its social media apps and announced a share buyback of as much as $50 billion, even as the firm is besieged by reports about Facebook's inadequate response to hate speech, misinformation and violent content, following reports from a whistleblower. Well, here to discuss the earnings in particular is Bloomberg's Laura Wright. Laura, good to have you. So, look, the top line results, how did Facebook react in terms of the aftermarket and what do the results show us?
Well, leading up to these results, Caroline, there's been a crescendo of negative news flow and analysts were really looking to see what Facebook can do to diversify, but also what Facebook can do to sustain advertising revenue. So total revenue came in at $29 billion. That was below expectations, and the forecast for the fourth quarter, that coming in at $31.5 billion at the lower range of the street's estimations. Daily and monthly active users broadly in line with expectations. But one hiccup for Facebook are the privacy changes that we've seen from Apple. And on the call, that is what executives said. That is the reason why Facebook missed on revenue.
Yeah, certainly we saw similar impacts as well on the business of Snap, which pointed to those iOS changes and the impacts on targeted advertising. What were some of the other kind of interesting takeaways for you, Laura?
The share buybacks, as you mentioned, Caroline, in the introduction, we learned Facebook is going to buy back $50 billion of stock going forward. And actually, in the third quarter, they already repurchased $14 billion of stock. Something a little more funky is the virtual reality universe, or the metaverse, as Mark Zuckerberg likes to say. So that represents smart glasses. We saw that collaboration between Facebook and Ray-Ban, glasses that can take pictures, you can have a phone call on them. And Facebook is really investing in a universe that we can't imagine at this stage. And on the call, they mentioned that they're going to break out the virtual reality universe, and that will be reported separately in the next earnings call. But as I referenced earlier, the privacy changes, negligible for a company such as Alphabet, but for Facebook, it is a real problem in terms of direct advertising and targeting.
Okay, what about what the whistleblower has said and the documents that she has produced and handed over to the SEC? I mean, the issue around users was one that she hit sort of squarely, and yet investors reacted quite positively to the user growth numbers. So what do investors think at the moment, as far as we can make out? How does all of this, for example, compare to Alphabet?
Well, I spoke to Freddie Late yesterday, CIO at Latitude Investment Management. He actually owns both Facebook and Alphabet. And for him, he's refrained holding Facebook for the last 5 years. But he thinks that Facebook is ready to take on these accusations surrounding privacy concerns. And he thinks that, look, if Facebook isn't ready to do it, then the regulator will pull their hand for them. Facebook trading 18 times forward earnings. And for him, Facebook can capitalize on a structurally growing market, which is online advertising. And for him, the rental bill of companies is going to be replaced by an advertising bill. And a lot of that model for Facebook is also applicable for Alphabet.
Okay, so that is a roundup of the Facebook earnings. We've got a list, as we said, of other big tech names reporting later this week that will round out the picture for us. But a solid beat there for Facebook, and interesting, as Laura and Caroline were discussing, that the user growth has come in fairly substantially above those estimates.
But the issue is that Facebook doesn't reveal which users and the ages or the sexes or the locations, and sort of this is, are investors essentially going to start to ask more questions? And I mean, on the call, often there are questions about it, but Facebook in the past has not revealed that. So that's sort of fascinating.
Investors and regulators could well put more pressure on the company to break out that kind of detail, given what we've seen in terms of the leaks and the information from the whistleblower and concerns particularly around Facebook's teenage users. All right, there's plenty more coming up. Thank you very much, Laura Wright, for that breakdown. Plenty more coming up here on Bloomberg. The markets, by the way, of course, we are an hour and a half away from the market open here in the UK and across Europe. The futures in the US are pointing up 0.2%. A very solid day on Wall Street yesterday, powered in large part by those earnings across a number of different businesses. You got the S&P 500 back to record lows. We'll see what the handover is to Europe then at 8 a.m. local time here in the UK. That is where things stand. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute, and this is the week Wall Street's been waiting for, the one in which we start seeing a deluge of company results headlined by big tech firms. Facebook reported after yesterday's closing bell, more people are using its network of social media apps than predicted. That overshadowed its revenue miss and the headwinds from Apple's privacy changes. Today we'll hear from Microsoft, Google, and an array of companies, ranging from GE to Hasbro and 3M. More companies are finding out what a tight labor market means. ExxonMobil's among them. Because of the pandemic-driven slump in demand last year and the oil market crash, Exxon said it would cut 15% of its staff by the end of next year. So people started quitting. Now Exxon is looking at raising salaries to try to stop the exodus. And there may be movement at the Kellogg's strike. The company seems to be softening its position on a two-tiered employment system. Changes to it have been a sticking point in the strike. Joan Doniger, Bloomberg Radio.
Your business landscape is ever-changing.
There could be a lot more selling to come.
Ours is too.
Just getting some headlines I want to bring to our audience.
The president's saying that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
We have something else in common.
The small caps continuing to feel the pressure.
We seek out the latest business news wherever we are.
A deep drop in Asian equities overnight.
Let's bring you some breaking news in terms of earnings. Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
BSO Now is your online home for brand new Boston Symphony Orchestra and Boston Pops performances. Discover new releases each week that include behind-the-scenes storytelling with conductors including music director Andres Nelsons, guest composers and musicians, plus critically acclaimed archival concerts and more. Visit bso.org/now, where the music plays on. BSO season sponsored by Bank of America.
Burden LLP Accountants and Advisors presents Tax Chat with Mayor Mintz, partner and co-leader of Burden's real estate practice.
Whether it's because of the COVID-19 pandemic or not, it is essential for anyone negotiating a deal to understand the underlying economic assumptions and the current market. From buying or selling assets to forming a joint venture, it's important to work with a sophisticated tax advisor who understands how the changing tax law may impact the structure of the deal. At Burden, we leverage our more than 100 years of transactional experience to help guide clients through the complexities of these structures and ensure that they understand any potential tax impact. If you're a high net worth individual or business owner, let Burden help protect you, your family, and your business.
For more Tax Chat from Burden, visit burdenllp.com. That's BERDONLLP.com. Burden Accountants and Advisors. We listen, we solve, we do.
Hey, Dad, your prescription will be ready in just a minute. Hey, Dad, your laundry will be ready in just a minute. Dad, your lunch will be ready in just a minute.
Hey, honey, why don't you take a minute?
When you help care for a loved one, you give them as much time as you can, making sure they're safe and comfortable. But it's just as important that you take some time for yourself. At AARP, we can help with information and useful tips on how you can maintain a healthy life balance, care for your own physical and mental well-being, and manage the challenges of caring for a loved one. Because the better care you take of yourself, the better care you can provide for your loved one.
Thanks, Dad.
Thank you. You're there for them. We're here for you. Find free care guides to support you and your loved one at aarp.org/caregiving. That's aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
The world's financial decision makers connect on the Bloomberg terminal. The buy side and the sell side together, collaborating across markets and countries in real time, sharing ideas, negotiating trades, and forming an influential network of over 325,000 financial professionals that helps power global markets. Isn't it time you join them? Request a demo at bloomberg.com/professional.
If trying to figure out the future of your business is keeping you up at night,
are you seeing it come back at all?
At least you have company.
You're hoping to get political pressure.
Do you expect the euro to strengthen? Why even have this hearing?
Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg. The world is listening.
Broadcasting live to London on DAB Digital Radio. To New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 106.1. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Good morning. It is 6:30 a.m. here in London. I'm Tom Mackenzie.
And I'm Caroline Hepker. Warm welcome to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, where in a moment we're going to talk about UBS's profits topping estimates. Bloomberg's Alison Williams will be joining us from our global investment banking team. Let's also go to the markets then. The baby's being thrown out with the bathwater. That's according to HSBC analysts. They've upgraded their call on Chinese stocks to overweight. Real estate, industrials, healthcare is where they see value. At the moment, the CSI 300 is down 0.1%. Also watching iron ore, which is up by 3.7% right now. China trying to assuage concerns about the economic slowdown that people expect there. S&P 500 E-mini futures are actually higher this morning. The S&P 500 futures up by 0.25%. US Stocks 50 futures also just about in the green. This is after the S&P 500 hit a new record high on Monday, 0.5% higher. This week, of course, is all about the mega cap tech stocks. And the Nasdaq also was up by 0.8% yesterday. MSCI Asia Pacific Index gains 0.4%. And just in terms of the bond markets, I'll give you a check for US yields. We trade at 1.64% right now. Tom?
OK, let's bring you to focus in on some of the corporate stories. The earnings were central to some of the market action we saw overnight in the US. Facebook shares gaining in late US trading. That was after reporting strong user growth in its social media apps and announcing a share buyback of as much as $50 billion. That did help ease investor concerns as last quarter's sales and forecasts for revenue this period actually missed analysts' estimates after media organisations published a series of damning reports as well based on internal documents disclosed by a whistleblower. CEO Mark Zuckerberg weighed in on the increasing competition for teens.
Over the last decade, as the audience that uses our apps has expanded so much and we focused on serving everyone, our services have gotten dialed to be the best for the most people who use them rather than specifically for young adults. And during this period, competition has also gotten a lot more intense, especially with Apple's iMessage growing in popularity, and more recently, the rise of TikTok, which is one of the most effective competitors that we have ever faced. So we are retooling our teams to make serving young adults their North Star.
Also weighing on the company's outlook are persistent headwinds from Apple's restrictions on consumer data collection.
Meanwhile, looking ahead to the budget tomorrow, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak is expected to announce that the public sector pay freeze will come to an end next year. Sunak will point to a solid economic recovery and encouraging signs in the labour market as reasons to end the pay pause for more than 2 million workers, including police officers and teachers. The Treasury will also put up the national minimum wage for those aged 23 by 6.6% in April, so that takes it to £9.50 per hour, but that's still below what trade unions say is needed to tackle the cost of living crisis.
Novartis is starting a strategic review of its Sandoz generic drug unit, looking at options including a separation of the business. Sandoz sales in the US declined by 20% in the third quarter. In terms of the rest of the earnings, core EPS for Novartis did beat estimates, but the company stuck to its forecast, saying this year's sales will grow by low to mid-single-digit percentages.
Right, those are a few of our top stories for you this morning. Let's get over to Bloomberg's Leanne Gerrans, who continues to follow the world news and everything out of Istanbul. Good morning, Leanne.
Caroline, good morning and thank you. Yes, let's start in Turkey. President Erdogan has dropped his demand for 10 Western ambassadors to be expelled from the country, de-escalating a diplomatic row that had shaken the lira. Erdogan said the envoys, including the US ambassador, had issued a statement to undo the, quote, slander caused by their earlier joint demand for Turkey to release a businessman and government critic. Now, the world is on pace to warm up by another 2.7 degrees Celsius in the next 80 years, even with the national climate pledges by countries all over the world. Bloomberg's Pooja Kondia reports from London.
This latest UN climate report shows that the world is still headed for catastrophic levels of warming. The temperature rise will far exceed the goal of keeping it below 2 degrees Celsius and preferably less than 1.5 degrees, as laid out in the Paris Agreement. The study, released ahead of the climate summit in Glasgow, shows that countries need to set even stronger targets for emissions reductions in the short term. In London, I'm Pooja Kondia, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Meanwhile, it's claimed our endless digital storage of data could be creating just as much global emissions as international air travel. The Institute of Engineering and Technology says pictures alone contribute to more than 355,000 tonnes of CO2 every year. Vivanette Taylor is on the panel behind the research.
People can lower their data carbon footprint by deleting duplicates, don't have 5 photographs of the one thing, clean out of the cloud, wipe any WhatsApp messages that you don't need.
Meanwhile, deleting any excess or unwanted photos will apparently help to reduce the amount of energy needed to power servers used to store data. And the US has issued new travel regulations requiring proof of full vaccination against COVID-19, along with a recent negative test. However, people from countries with low vaccine supplies who are not travelling on tourist visas and those under 18 will be exempt. The new rules are effective from November the the 8th lift the severe travel restrictions on people from China, India and much of Europe. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Tom.
Leanne, thank you very much indeed. And with your latest sport, here's Chris Cave.
Chelsea boss Thomas Tuchel doesn't feel it would be right to suggest tonight's League Cup tie with Southampton is bottom of his list of priorities this season. The European champions are attempting to defend their Champions League title and have the prospect of the Club World Cup in 2022. They're also top of the Premier League. Former England cricket captain Nasser Hussain believes Ben Stokes' return to the squad for this winter's Ashes series may benefit spinner Jack Leach. The all-rounder has declared himself ready for Australia after taking a break to focus on his mental health and recover from injury. England head to Latvia this evening as they look to continue their perfect start to Women's World Cup qualifying. Northern Ireland host Austria, Wales are at home to Estonia, and Republic of Ireland take on Finland.
Chris Cave there with your sports report this morning. Right, let's get on to the main news this morning. The UBS results. The company posted profit that topped estimates as it benefited from surging fee income at its wealth management and investment banking businesses. But it warned that client activity is expected to slow in the final months of the year. Well, joining us now to break down the results is Alison Williams, Senior Analyst for Global Investment Banks at Bloomberg Intelligence. Alison, I know you're staying up late in your part of the world to talk us through the key takeaways from these results. I mean, pretty staggering quarter for UBS.
Yes, and I would say that they, like we saw at many of the U.S. peers, like we saw at some of the early reporting European peers, really reporting strength in the investment bank. Equities is the business that has generated a big positive surprise across the banks, and UBS no exception, growing that revenue over 20%. So perhaps not as much as the overall U.S. peer average, but close. On the fixed income trading side, we saw weakness, and we've seen that across the bank, but that's less important for UBS. They're much more equity-focused, and they had a really strong year-ago quarter, so their comparison is a bit tougher. So weakness there isn't that surprising. And then on the investment banking fee side, that's really where the strength is this quarter. So it's equities and the fees. We did see that shared by UBS in M&A as well as the underwriting fees.
And Alison, what about these concerns flagged by the team at UBS that maybe client activity will slow in the fourth quarter?
I would say that's typical. In fact, I would be surprised if any of the banks didn't say that, only because the fourth quarter does tend to be seasonally weaker. And so, again, I think this sort of echoes what we've heard in terms of the potential for slowing. The one area that looks a little bit soft to us is the fact that they did have some outflows in the Asia region. We've been going through the results. We haven't seen anything specific on that, but we'll want to hear more about that on the conference call, because obviously that's the long-term growth story for UBS.
Alison, just briefly, pay for performance. It's been another key line for the banks this earnings season.
It is, and we do expect, we expect that to be sort of a topic for the call. For the investment banks, we can look at compensation accrued through the third quarter, but since it's only accrual, we're also going to want to see what the finals look like number in the fourth quarter. But that is certainly a number that we're seeing go up across the banks this year. And in fact, many of the U.S. banks already talking about, pay for an increase in compensation for next year because things are very competitive. But it shouldn't be surprising that in a record year for M&A and equities, which is what we're looking at, that you're going to see pay going up.
Alison, thanks so much for being with us. Alison Williams is our Senior Analyst for Global Investment Banks at Bloomberg Intelligence, taking us through the UBS results. This is Bloomberg.
It's time for today. If knowledge is power, the Bloomberg Terminal is your power up, connecting you to the real-time financial news, data, and analytics that can take your workflow to the next level. Power up at Bloomberg.com/professional.
Today's STEM tip. Okay, you know recycling is important. No
one wants plastic in the ocean. Here's a cool way to repurpose a plastic bottle. Build an awesome terrarium. Cut a large plastic bottle in half and fill the base with sand, pebbles, potting soil, and your favorite plant. I chose an African violet. Put the top of the bottle over your base and place it in the sun. Your plant will grow sealed in its own ecosystem. Fun, right? Learn more at She Can STEM. A message from the Ad Council.
The private equity space is more competitive than ever before. Successful transactions require quality, speed, and efficiency. But closing a deal is just the beginning. That's why Witham is dedicated to the entire life cycle of your investment. Private equity investors trust Witham to bring thoughtful financial insights, tax structuring, integration, and cyber risk mitigation to strengthen value creation. Experience the Witham way. Visit witham.com/PE. Witham.
For the Jewish Communal Fund, Barbara Novick, investment professional and philanthropist.
I think JCF has one of the best funds out there. It's very reasonable in its pricing, it's very flexible in its investments, and I give them an A+ for client service.
A fund may be opened with a $5,000 contribution of cash or appreciated securities and can be used as an alternative to a private foundation. At any time, you may suggest which charities you would like to support and in what amounts. Choose from the menu of high-rated investment options, and your charitable fund can earn tax-free income.
It's a very client-centric organization. They have a very user-friendly website, and I find they make my life easier.
Let the Jewish Communal Fund be your personal connection to charitable giving. Open a JCF fund now to lock in this year's tax deduction. Call 212-752-8277, 212-752-8277, or visit jcfny.org.
What's the true value of your custodial relationship? Ben Harrison of BNY Mellon's Pershing explains.
As sophisticated investors demand more from their advisors, advisory firms, in turn, need to rely on their custodian to help them grow their complex businesses. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, supporting the rapid growth of RIAs is our #1 priority. We understand what it means to deliver true value to our clients who are looking for a custodian that is aligned with their best interest and delivers high-value solutions, all in an open architecture environment with flexibility, choice, and transparency. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength, resiliency, and high-touch service that BNY Mellon Pershing provides. When you work with Pershing, we put your business first. Can your custodian say that?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Pershing Advisor Solutions, LLC. Member FINRA SIPC.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically, yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
Essential business news from across the globe on Bloomberg Daybreak.
This is Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us today at 5 a.m. on Bloomberg Daybreak.
We get reaction to Facebook earnings and look ahead to Alphabet and Microsoft.
And is President Biden closer to a deal on his economic agenda? We'll check in with Bloomberg's Joe Matthew in Washington.
Bloomberg Daybreak, weekday mornings at 5, followed by Bloomberg Surveillance at 7 on Bloomberg 1130, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. When was the moment you discovered that you were meant for the business world?
Have you been getting a lot of inquiries from employers?
And then you started looking for the best sources of information.
Technology is challenging the regulators.
Doctors use kind of a virtual reality look.
I feel like the world is courting Elon Musk.
Which is how you got here.
How are other bankers restricted now?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
145 over 92.
180 over 111.
182 over 100. And I had a heart attack and a cardiac arrest. And then a stroke.
Your blood pressure numbers could change your life.
A lot of people don't understand, including myself, I didn't, now I do, the impact of having a stroke.
My memory is shot.
When I woke up, I couldn't speak.
Lowering your high blood pressure could save you from a heart attack or stroke. If you've stopped your treatment plan, restart it or talk to your doctor about creating one that works better for you. Start taking the right steps at manageyourbp.org.
It's a new life, but I'm going to make it better. Coming back. Ask your doctor, check your blood pressure.
Brought to you by the American Heart Association, American Medical Association, and the Ad Council.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters in the City of London, I'm Laura Wright with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. S&P 500 futures reaching a record after news of a call between Janet Yellen and China's Liu He materialized, perhaps suggesting improved relations between the United States and China. Nasdaq 100 futures up 0.5%. Earnings from Facebook after market yesterday. We learned of $50 billion of planned share buybacks, although revenue was a slight miss. After market today, we'll have results from Alphabet, Twitter and Microsoft, the tech titan earnings season coming through. Right now in the Asian session, the Nikkei 225 is the outperformer, up 1.9%. We've seen increasingly negative sentiment for the CSI 300. It was in positive territory earlier this morning, now down 0.3% in Hong Kong markets, affected by negative sentiment surrounding the property sector. Eurostoxx 50 futures are flat. Earnings from UBS, it was a beat on net income, $2.3 billion. US benchmark 10-year treasuries yielding 1.638%. The Bloomberg dollar spot index slightly bid this morning. Cable at a 1.37 handle, down 0.1%. And in commodities, the focus is on soft commodities. Coffee up 13%, priced at $2 a pound. Supply chain bottlenecks, increased freight prices and lockdowns in Southeast Asia all having an impact. That's the Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Here's Leanne Gerrans with the World News. Morning, Leanne.
Laura, good morning and thank you. Iran and the European Union will hold talks in Brussels tomorrow, which are designed to clear the way for a wider diplomatic push to revive the 2015 nuclear deal. The meeting will be closely watched by oil markets, looking for a sign of when Iran might resume exporting large quantities of crude. Crude oil is trading at $86 a barrel this morning. Now, the US is suspending economic aid to Sudan after the military arrested the Prime Minister and other government officials. A State Department spokesperson said $700 million package had been intended to support Sudan's democratic transition. Sudan's military rulers say they are dissolving the country's highest decision-making body of transitional power-sharing administration and will appoint a new government. And finally, the Great British Dinner Party is back, according to the Telegraph, which is citing the latest Waitrose food and drink report. Over half of those surveyed said they enjoyed staying at home more than they did pre-COVID, but a quarter want to host more dinner parties. The report also points to soaring champagne sales. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Have you been polishing your crystals? Crystal glasses.
Crystal glasses.
silver cutlery.
Well,
I know what you like, Caroline.
Do you?
Caroline doesn't tell many people this, but she loves to cook. And as far as I know, she's a very great entertainer. Am I right, Caroline?
Well, I did a good beef bourguignon a couple of weeks ago. Well, listen, the holiday season's coming up. I think it would make a change. Having said that, COVID cases are going up in the UK, so one has to be a bit careful who one invites around the dinner table these days.
I must say, I absolutely hate people in my house, so I never have a dinner party. I'm one of those really awful people that hates to entertain. I'd rather go and mess up someone else's house and then not have to do all the washing, Caroline.
There we go.
So
We'll
I
have to
might
have a
come to
radio.
yours for a dinner party, yes.
Absolutely. Leanne Gowers, thank you so much for the world news. A bit of cooking advice as well. Right, let's talk about what traders are cooking up then. Increasing bets on rate hikes next year in the US, the UK, New Zealand and South Korea as the cost of living soars. But flattening yield curves, seen as the market's assessment of economic health, of course, show rising concern that a rapid withdrawal of support from central banks will hurt the nascent recovery. Well, joining us this morning is Ella Hoxer, who is the Senior Investment Manager for Global Bonds at Pictet Asset Management. Ella, welcome. Thanks for being with us. Should we pay attention to spreads narrowing if markets have been so distorted by more than a decade of central bank bond buying? Does it matter?
Good morning. Well, it does matter, of course, in the sense that we're seeing a bit of a dichotomy at the moment with regards to what interest rate markets are pricing and what we're seeing in terms of credit spreads, as you allude. And that basically is that, we're worried about inflation, but at the same time, we're pricing much more in terms of policy tightening, and yet that is not affecting spreads, and neither is what's happening in China with regards to their real estate sector. So we find those dichotomies as something that eventually resolves over time. And of those, we would say that the inflation story is probably the one that's more baked in with regards to valuations, certainly in interest rate space.
Do you see, though, a further sell-off in US 10-year treasuries? Is the yield trajectory just higher from here?
Well, I think we're coming to the top of the range we experienced in March, but that was for very different reasons. The growth backdrop was much more supportive. You have a combination of factors then, sort of coming out of the pandemic, vaccinations taking place, and also this large fiscal stimulus that was approved in the U.S., et cetera, et cetera. This time around, the market is worrying about a very different set of inflationary outcomes, and also worrying whether they actually affect growth, as it rightly should be concluded. Nonetheless, what's changed is that the Fed's stance has changed now relative to March. So the Fed's much more alert now. It's already starting to taper its QE purchases. And as we see in the market, quite a bit is priced in terms of interest rate hikes. So we would actually say that there's less room for rates to increase a lot here. And actually what we've been doing to that end is, unwinding or taking out our flattener positions in the U.S. and in Europe to some extent. The idea being that we have quite a bit now priced into the 10-year part of the curve that you referred to, but also in the 5-year part of the curve now for a change for us.
OK, what's your view on what's happening in gilt markets in the UK? Pricing in a very acute pace of tightening for Britain. Can that really be true? Do you think that's what the Bank of England will do?
We think the UK is a little bit special in that sense, in the sense that we're exhibiting much higher inflationary pressures here, and there are structural reasons for those inflationary pressures to stay in place, and that vector is predominantly wages. Because of the Brexit issues around basically labor availability, etc., you're seeing some more structural pressures there. So, in effect, the Bank of England may be forced to do more and earlier to basically try and establish its credentials in terms of inflationary fighting. And we've been seeing them shift in that direction. So we would not fade that just yet.
Ella, how closely will you be watching tomorrow's budget out of the UK, with the Chancellor Rishi Sunak spelling out his spending priorities, planning, and spelling out his spending priorities for the next year?
Obviously very closely, but what's been different about this budget, in line with the strategy that this government followed over the past 18-plus months, is it's already released a lot of the elements of that budget. Net, it's a budget that's going to have some populist nuances in terms of lifting wages, etc. But on the whole, the UK is moving towards a tighter fiscal stance. So that's the key message for us. So we're getting tighter fiscal in the next 2 to 3 years, including with this budget, via higher taxes and also tighter monetary policy, at least over the more immediate term. So net, it's not a great cocktail for growth, and probably that's why you're seeing the flattening of the curve in the UK, which, as I said earlier, we would not be inclined to fade here.
Okay, interesting on the UK. A question also on what's going on in China. Some see another red flag from modern land, another kind of property market problem, and yet others talk about, the baby being thrown out with the bathwater in terms of Chinese stocks. I'm thinking specifically about the report this morning from HSBC analysts.
China is complicated right now. I think, we think a lot is priced in the high yield sector of real estate, and markets are struggling a little bit to get their head around in terms of the policy that not just the central bank, but the broader authorities are following. But, as I say, a lot of that seems to be reflected in the high yield sector. But the key takeaway for us is that net is going to be more harmful to growth. You're talking about the largest sector of the world's second largest economy being under pressure, downward pressure. So net for us, that means that even the policy is likely to be more supportive on the margin. We're probably likely to get more disappointment from China because of the pressure in the real estate sector.
Ella, just very briefly before we let you go, what are your top conviction calls at this point?
Well, the key one that we've been rotating to in the last 2 weeks has been to fade some of this reflation rhetoric that's taken over markets, and that's by taking off our positions, both in terms of flattening in the curve, buying a little bit of duration here in Europe, which has repriced with the U.S., but also actually offloading our commodity FX exposures, which is, all of this has been pretty much hedges in terms of the funds.
Ella, thank you so much for your time. Really great to have you on radio this morning. Thanks for being with us. Ella Hoxha is Senior Investment Manager for Global Bonds at Pictet Asset Management. Rounding up this hour of Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. But don't go away, stay with me. I've got lots more on COP and the UK budget next. This is Bloomberg.
The world's financial